Russia's cope cages just can't cope anymore. Since the start of the war, Ukrainian drones have been a nightmare for Russian armored vehicles. Russia, once boasting the world's largest tank fleet, was blindsided by the reality that its multi-million-dollar battle tanks could be destroyed by drones costing only a few $1,000s, armed with leftover Cold War munitions. Desperate for a solution, Russia slapped together cope cages, welded metal projections meant to shield their tanks from drone strikes. But as it turns out, these so-called defenses are only making things worse. So why were the cope cages ever used, and how has Ukraine's drone warfare rendered them even more useless? In this video, we're breaking down why Russian tanks have suffered so much, and why things are about to get even worse for them. As of November 18, 2024, 3,569 Russian tanks have become casualties in Ukraine. 2,502 of them have been completely destroyed. That's over 20% of Russia's total pre-war tank fleet of 16,970 units, according to global data. Russia has lost an additional 1,753 armored fighting vehicles, 5,008 infantry fighting vehicles, 550 armored personnel carriers, and 312 infantry mobility vehicles. Traditional anti-tank weapons like anti-tank guided missiles, man-carried equipment like the Javelin and NLAW, and anti-material rifles like Ukraine's massive Alligator sniper rifle have been responsible for many of those destroyed units. Artillery has played an even bigger role. However, drone attacks have destroyed many other vehicles. At the start of the war, Ukraine used large military drones like Turkey's Bayraktar TB2 to wreak havoc on Russian armor, but smaller bomb-dropping or Kamikaze drones proved even more cost-effective. A tank like Russia's T-72 can cost between $1 and $2 million per unit. The T-90, supposedly Russia's most advanced main battle tank it can actually put into the field, T-14 Armata, can cost between $4 and $7 million apiece. In contrast, Ukraine's small drones have a price tag of $1,700 per kill, according to Alexander Kamyshin, Ukraine's former Minister of Strategic Industries. Since Ukraine is outnumbered and outgunned, those drones are the ideal weapon for waging a war of attrition, and Kamyshin claimed at the beginning of the year that the FPV drone was becoming the main battle weapon of the Ukrainian people. Little wonder why President Zelensky made the production of 1 million of them one of his government's highest priorities for 2024. It already became clear that Ukraine would surpass that goal by February, and that was bad news for Russia's cope cages. Russia was outfitting its armored vehicles with cope cages even before the invasion started. They first appeared on Russian tanks in late 2021 and were reportedly designed primarily to counter drone-launched munitions, with some observers speculating they might also offer limited protection against top-attack missiles like the Javelin. The Javelin was introduced into service in the US military in 1996 and was designed specifically to counter Russian tanks. Rather than impacting the main body of a target, the projectile targeted the turret, impacting it at a downward trajectory at high velocity. A tank turret is much less protected than the vehicle's main body, and the Javelin can go through over 30 inches of rolled homogeneous steel armor, according to US Army training documents. Although modern tanks feature advanced composite armor that combines steel with ceramics, high-density materials like tungsten or depleted uranium, and even spaced armor for added protection, they still cannot withstand such impacts. They can't be engineered to, either. Giving a tank enough armor to withstand an impact from a Javelin round would make it weigh over 200 tons, which is completely impractical for basic mobility, let alone transporting these tanks to their theater of operations. To make matters worse, Russia's tanks are particularly vulnerable to impacting rounds because they don't protect their ammunition racks in a sealed compartment. One hit can set off a chain reaction that destroys the tank and its crew. The only feasible way to counter something like the Javelin is through active protection systems that can undermine the missile's guidance system, or even counter it before it can impact its target. But the Russians nevertheless tried to find something else. They respected the Javelin enough to try to come up with an improvised countermeasure. Steel cages with grill-like structures appeared over the tops of Russian tank turrets in late 2021. The projections were spaced a few feet above them. The concept behind these constructions was that the incoming Javelin projectile would impact the cage first and explode prematurely, which would limit damage to the tank beneath. This is not a new concept. Early in the Cold War era, tank engineers built structures spaced away from their vehicle's main body to protect them against anti-material weapons, and sometimes it's possible to improvise and see success. During the Battle of Marawi between May and October 2017, Filipino forces protected their vehicles with wooden plates attached to the outsides, which were effective in getting incoming RPG-2 rounds to explode prematurely. The wooden armor helped the Filipino security forces defeat the ISIS-affiliated terror group known as Abu Sayyaf. The United States and its allies tried something similar against the RPG rounds they encountered in the War on Terror. They used slat armor to protect their tanks from these projectiles. The problem is that comparing an RPG to a javelin is like comparing a cat to a tiger. Unlike an RPG, the javelin has a tandem warhead that's designed to defeat explosive reactive armor, ERA. ERA works by detonating outward when hit by a projectile, forcibly driving metal plates apart to damage, deflect, or disrupt the incoming threat before it can reach the target vehicle's main body. However, the javelin defeats this system with its tandem warhead design. The first warhead activates the ERA, neutralizing it, while the second penetrates the main armor to destroy the target. Rest assured, if ERA can't stop a javelin, a cope cage certainly won't. As Russia moved into its quagmire, it quickly discovered that the cope cages weren't stopping javelin rounds. The javelin quickly became an icon of Ukraine's resistance, with medieval-inspired portraits of saint-like figures holding the American weapons spreading online. Meanwhile, the cope cages were an icon of Russian incompetence, which extended to far more than the one domain of warfare. However, the Russians still used the cope cages because they realized the growing importance of small drones, a lesson imparted on them as early as 10 years ago, at the height of the Syrian civil war. The cope cage might not be effective against a javelin round, but it could have some effect against drones dropping simpler weapons like anti-tank grenades or even smaller mortar rounds, since these will hit the cage first. Since Ukrainian drone pilots made sport of dropping grenades into open tank hatches in those early days, the adaptation saved lives of Russian tank crews. The cope cages also have had success in stopping small loitering munitions armed with lighter explosives. We have often mocked cope cages on this channel, but the best proof of their effectiveness, at least in part, comes from images of Ukrainian tank crews outfitting them to their own vehicles. By August 2023, images of cope cages welded to a donated Challenger tank began to surface. The cage armor extended around the tank and above the turret, meaning that Ukraine is experimenting with a different design. Okay, so the cope cage isn't completely useless. It probably did save some tanks from being totaled, particularly earlier in the war when Ukraine's drone pilots weren't as skilled as they are now. What did they do? Ukraine's small drone pilots turned increasingly to kamikaze munitions and began to avoid coming in from the top. The thing about an FPV drone is that it's small, fast, and maneuverable. Ukraine's drone pilots have gotten so nimble that they can navigate their UAVs inside apartment buildings and look for a target hiding out in a specific room. With such precision, they can easily move around or under cope cages, and they can impact their target vehicle with sizable weapons that have a decent chance of destroying even a main battle tank, let alone lighter vehicles. These drones most often impact Russian vehicles from the side. The poor internal design of Russian tanks means that there will always be an elevated chance of an impact setting the ammunition magazines off and blowing them up in jack-in-the-box style explosions. So Russia adapted again and began to design ever more elaborate cage armor for their tanks. The most effective adaptation likely involved outfitting ERA to the cages, if the panels hadn't been stolen by logistics officers looking to make a quick buck. Some cages have incorporated sandbags to enhance protection by absorbing and dispersing the impact energy of incoming rounds. This approach leverages the loose, dense material within the bags to complement the cage's defensive structure. There are worse ways to adapt, though. When it realized that Ukrainian drones were maneuvering around cage armor, Russia started to field armored vehicles that looked like they might be out of a Mad Max movie. These cages cover the entirety of an armored vehicle's body and were seen as early as the Syrian civil war. Sometimes there have even been spikes projecting from the cages, as seen in video widely circulating on social media. Russia continued to evolve the cope cage. Another elaborate design appeared at the Army 2023 Defense Expedition that August. The cage was attached to the turret and elevated through tubular poles. Metal mesh was used to enhance visibility. To add protection, the mesh was combined with triangular slats with parallel peaks and valleys. The Russian brass may have determined that this design is far better for stopping loitering munitions. Among the most notable of the so-called Mad Max monstrosities were the turtle tanks that appeared in April 2024. These vehicles featured a sloping outer shell with a sheet of metal covering the top and extending down the sides. While several were deployed, one turtle tank was destroyed in an artillery strike that same month. Such an approach to cage armor doesn't inspire total confidence, as it could limit the crew's situational awareness, mobility, and their ability to leave the vehicle in case of an emergency. The turtle tank, for example, meant that the turret could not be moved. These modifications also make a tank much easier to find at a distance. From there, an artillery strike is likely coming, and no cope cage is going to cope with that. This is why these elaborate cage designs are the exception rather than the rule, despite their increased visibility online. Most Russian vehicles seen online don't have these elaborate cope cages. A Russian study found that cage armor works best against common anti-material rounds like RPG when the rods of the cage are 10 mm in diameter and the spacing between them is 80 mm. This design allows for a 65% chance of disrupting an incoming round. Since Ukrainian drones are often armed with such rounds, this is a surprisingly reasonable level of protection. In general, a design featuring narrower rods with more spacing is more effective than thicker rods with less spacing. The problem for Russia is that the more effective design is not standardized outside of protecting the sides and rear of a tank. The fact that there's no standardized cope cage suggests that the Russians have yet to find a reliable way to protect their tank turrets with slat armor in the way that the side or rear armor can be protected. If there were a cope cage or system of elaborate cage armor that actually worked well, it would quickly see widespread use. But so far, the turtle tanks or Mad Max tanks of the world have been comparative rarities, and the skill of Ukraine's drone pilots explains why. Even if the turtle tank hadn't been destroyed by artillery, Ukrainian drone pilots would have easily been able to fly under the shell and deliver their payloads. Unfortunately for Russians, they've yet to find a reliable alternative to cage armor either, though not for the lack of trying. In the first half of 2024, it became evident that electronic jammers would become an increasingly important part of any military force thanks to the ubiquitous use of small drones that were hard to counter through kinetic methods. Jammers would be needed to protect both infantry and armor from these constant menaces. Early in the year, Russia looked like it was learning this lesson and adapting. T-72 tanks equipped with jammers began to appear on the battlefield. The new tanks understandably made Ukraine's drone pilots nervous. But when these tanks began to be captured in April, the Ukrainians found that their jammers were unlikely to work. They pointed straight up, meaning they were unlikely to protect a tank from a drone coming in on the sideways trajectory. The jammers were also not assembled well. The antennae were manufactured in a factory, but bound together through improvised methods. This lack of effective standardization made Ukrainian troops question the jammers' effectiveness at all. As 2024 came to a close, Russian tanks continued to suffer from the Ukrainian FPV drones, so Moscow has yet to solve the jammer problem in a systematic way. We can expect Russian tanks to continue to rely, at least in part, on the cope cages as 2025 begins. Unfortunately for them, Ukraine just got a whole lot better at countering these too, and all without expensive javelin ammunition. From the beginning of the war, Ukraine has had an uncanny ability to bring new stuff to the field, whether in the form of new weapons like its long-range drones or in repurposing old weapons. Ukraine's use of 3D printers has helped its defense industry in the process. Ukraine started showing its innovation here by taking Soviet anti-tank grenades and 3D printing fins for them to make them good drone-delivered munitions. However, these rounds would be ineffective against well-made cage armor because they would detonate prematurely. But now there are two rounds designed to defeat the cope cages. Meet the FRAGS munitions, manufactured by a domestic Ukrainian company called Shockwave Dynamics. Both rounds come off of 3D printers and have a platter charge warhead. What does that mean? Let's look at what these bad boys can do. The first type is the FRAGS 05975. It's an explosive charge that weighs 0.9 kilograms and hosts hundreds of ball bearings on its body just behind the outer layer. This round is primarily designed for anti-personnel missions. To see why it works against cage armor, we must first compare it to an impact from a normal round. Kamikaze drones often carry conventional, cylindrical, high-explosive warheads when they impact or explode near their targets. Upon detonation, the fragmentation spreads out in an omnidirectional ring. Infantry in a vehicle like an armored personnel carrier who take cover behind a cage are better protected because the cage can disperse the force and prevent this ring of high-energy debris from getting through. The FRAGS 05975 round, though, concentrates its force forward and backward to give it more directed debris spread. This concentration is effective at getting through the cage and impacting targets behind it. One of the first confirmed uses of the anti-personnel FRAG round came on January 4, 2024 in the Robotyne area in Zaporizhia Oblast. The footage shows 5 Russian soldiers congregating near 2 destroyed T-90 tanks, one of which had seen its turret blown off in a jack-in-the-box explosion. 3 of the troops were running. 5 seconds in, we saw why. A small Ukrainian FPV was chasing them. The explosive the drone was carrying then detonated about 5 seconds into the clip. The airburst sent explosive fragments in a wide field that impacted all of them. One of the soldiers stopped moving forward. Another struggled underneath the charred tank. The third struggled to stand after the detonation. Two others seemed to successfully move away when the video feed cut off. If these troops had been taking cover behind cage armor, they would have had nowhere to go. All of the force would have been concentrated on them and all would have likely not made it out. The second round is the FRAGS 09576, which weighs 1.3 kilograms and is used in anti-material roles. A traditional anti-material shaped charge will often detonate prematurely upon impacting cage armor, failing to deliver its lethal punch to the main body of the target. The EFP-S, however, uses a shock impact core designed to penetrate protective cages and strike the vehicle behind them, making it far more effective against such defenses. The FRAGS 09576 and the FRAGS 05975 rounds both made their debut in December 2023, and each has distinct damage radii. The FRAGS 09576 has a radius of continuous damage of 5 meters and an effective damage radius of 8 meters. Meanwhile, the FRAGS 05975 is larger, with a radius of continuous damage of 8 meters and an effective damage radius of 14 meters. These frag rounds are mounted on drones using nylon clamps. Since the munitions are designed for remote detonation, the clamps allow operators to align explosives for maximum efficiency. This setup also positions the munitions with the drone's camera, giving pilots a clear view of the target and ensuring precise detonation. Unlike Cold War-era munitions that Ukraine previously adapted for drone use, these frag grenades are purpose-built for modern drone warfare, providing enhanced accuracy and destructive capability. Russian social media and military bloggers raised the alarm about the new Ukrainian rounds as soon as they began to appear. Russia's Marines were among the first troops confirmed to have encountered it. They warned, "Landed a quadcopter drone with a new 360-degree shrapnel ammunition. Be attentive and careful. The enemy uses newer and newer weapons." Documents from Shockwave Dynamics state that the armor penetration for a FRAGS round is 25 mm. It's primarily designed for destroying more lightly armored vehicles protected by cope cages, such as infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, but that does not mean it's useless against tanks. One circulating video showed a drone armed with a FRAGS round crashing into a Russian tank. After the explosion, the footage showed a penetrating gash toward the top of the turret. This would have been damaging to the crew inside. The increased use of rounds specifically designed to penetrate cage armor, deliverable via small drones, means that Russia's beleaguered tank fleet is facing even more hurdles in the near future. Until it can find a way to adequately protect its tanks against drones with jammers, we can expect the cope cages to continue to struggle to cope as the war enters its 4th calendar year. One thing's for sure, Russia's tank fleet, which had sent shivers down the spine of Western leaders since World War II, has seen its reputation go up in smoke, literally. The term cope cage might be a term that originated with Ukrainian propagandists, but it's stuck, and it's become a calling card for Russia's lost reputation, all thanks to the ingenuity of Ukrainian weapons designers. What do you think is coming next in the tank war in Ukraine? Will Russia finally find a way to equip its armored vehicles with proper jammers, or can we expect more improvised cope cages in the near future? The battlefield in Ukraine has changed yet again, and Russia is losing the race to keep up. Ukraine just unveiled a weapon that's not only ingenious, but devastating. A mothership drone carrying smaller Kamikaze drones ready to wreak havoc on Russian forces. This isn't just a new tactic, it's a direct response to being outgunned and outnumbered, and it's turning Russia's outdated war machine into scrap metal. For Ukraine, it's survival. For Russia, it's humiliation. This new system is already proving its worth, showing how far Ukraine has come in using innovation to fight against overwhelming odds. But how does it work? And why is it such a nightmare for Putin's forces? Let's start with the Dovbush T-10, the unassuming drone that's flipping the script in this brutal war. This military-grade drone was first announced in December 2022 as one of Ukraine's first forays into domestic drone production. At the time, the drone was designed specifically as a surveillance-only drone. Unlike classic military drone models that would be used for surveillance, such as the Skyton Raybird 3, another Ukrainian drone type, the Dovbush T-10 was made to be practically disposable. First, the drone has a relatively short range compared to its big brothers, with a maximum relay range of around 25 miles. This means that it could only feasibly be deployed at or around an active front line to be of any use. Otherwise, the drone could easily get out of range of its controller and just follow its last input command until it inevitably drops out of the sky due to wind or enemy fire. In fact, this actually happened in September 2023, when a Dovbush T-10 drone was found stuck in a tree by Russian forces. However, while the drone by itself is relatively harmless, it has significantly higher potential, a deadly potential. While it was primarily designed as a surveillance-only drone, it has a solid carrying capacity of around 44 pounds. This means that it could easily carry a modified grenade or even a TM62 anti-tank mine, which could then be dropped from the sky. There are no recordings of the drone used as an ordnance-dropping device, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that this strategy was previously experimented with or even tested among Ukrainian forces. After all, the initial report in December 2022 suggested that the Dovbush could be used for exactly this purpose with some modifications. But where the Dovbush seems to shine is its stealthy operation capabilities. The drone is atypically light for its size and transmitting capacity, allowing it to perform covert intelligence or surveillance operations. This is supported by the drone's extremely simple deployment options. The rack that the drone uses to launch itself into the sky can be mounted on pretty much any pickup truck. It allows the drone operating crew to load drones without using military-grade equipment, and on vehicles that are much faster and more agile than typical infantry support, which can keep the drone operators away from danger. Speaking of drone operators, the Dovbush T10 has a dual GPS and inertial navigation system that the two-way data link relies on to position the drone against both the operating base and the ground. The inertial navigation system serves as an important backup, as it's an entirely internal system that doesn't depend on data transfer to operate for a limited time. This means that the drone is much less likely to be affected by signal jamming technology. Against an opponent like Russia, which has practically mastered jamming technology in the last few years, this can be a game changer. Russia's advances in this area come from the fact that the country has its own drone program similar to Ukraine's, using commercial-grade Kamikaze drones. However, Russia also has the somewhat inherent advantage of being allied with China, which hosts some of the largest players in the commercial drone development field, particularly in terms of navigation and guidance technology. The Dovbush T10 has another last trick up its sleeve to make it even more effective on the battlefield. It's cheap. According to an interview in 2023 with the co-founder of the company that makes the drone, the estimated cost of the basic Dovbush T10 model, which presumably has the GPS and INS system and a camera, is a paltry $12,000. While this is a much higher price tag than commercial entertainment drones such as the aforementioned DJI Mavic, which costs in the range of $2,000, the price is a drop in the bucket compared to more advanced long-range drones, which can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to make. Why is this important? Well, this war is also a battle of funding. For Russia, the only real way to take a drone down that's hovering a few hundred feet in the air is to launch a guided missile or another drone at it. The first option is particularly devastating, as a Buk missile, which was sometimes used for this precise purpose, is estimated to have cost the Russian government approximately $200,000 to make. This means that Russia is effectively sinking 15 times more money into countering what is essentially a surveillance drone. In the first report from December 2022, it was estimated that Dovbush T10s could be used to cover the entire front line at a rate of 1 drone per 6 miles of the front line. Conservative estimates put the number of drones needed for this task between 500 and 600. To put this into perspective, if Russia would use $500 to take out those drones, it would cost its military $100 million in missiles alone. But the newest innovation that uses the Dovbush doesn't rely just on that drone. The latest imagery suggests that the Dovbush drones are used to carry 6 smaller commercial Kamikaze drones under their wings. The method of transport is also somewhat unusual. In a stroke of genius, the Dovbush T10 was minimally modified to include only the previous mentioned ordnance-carrying capabilities. The Kamikaze drones have the ordnance strapped onto them, and the ordnance is then attached to the T10's equipment mounts scattered under the wings. In essence, the ordnance itself serves as an adapter between the larger and smaller drones, with no direct contact between them. The Kamikaze drones lie upside down until they are deployed, which is done by simply dropping their ordnance from the Dovbush to disengage the lock. Each Kamikaze drone can fly independently from the mothership T10. However, they remain linked electronically. This is due to the lower radio range of the smaller drone, and one of the main reasons the T10s are used as the delivery platform. The T10's larger antenna and repeater are borrowed for the use of the Kamikaze drones. With small drones having a range of only a few miles before they start running into signal problems, the repeaters on the T10 effectively allow the Kamikaze drones to be controlled by operators who could be up to 25 miles away. The stronger two-way data link between the T10 and the operator interface means that the system has practically the same reliability and safety as when connecting the Kamikaze drones directly to the operator. But there's another important aspect of using the T10 as the mothership. The drone can be used to confirm strikes and kills. As you'd expect to be the case with first-person view kamikaze drones, the camera feed inevitably cuts off at the moment of impact and detonation. This means that until now, the Ukrainian army would either need to guess the level of inflicted damage upon the enemy or use a separate drone to conduct surveillance. The Dovbush T-10 solves that problem neatly. Due to its excellent surveillance capabilities and a flight system that has some loitering capabilities, by allowing the drone to turn in a relatively small circle to maintain altitude over a certain point or area, the large drone can take off, deploy its smaller kamikaze drones, and then wait around until they reach their targets. With the main drone's larger battery life, the smaller drones even have a chance to loiter around and evade enemy counterattacks to a degree, directly improving their odds of surviving an encounter until they can be detonated for maximum effect. Furthermore, the T-10 was specifically designed to be a stealth operation drone, unlike its smaller kamikaze cousins. Due to a significantly smaller noise profile and better anti-electronic warfare capabilities, the Dovbush has much better odds of going deeper behind enemy lines. This, coupled with the drone's larger range, potentially makes the innovative Mothership system even deadlier than before. It could allow the Ukrainian army to target military compounds and infantry setups that were previously out of reach of the system, or would be much riskier for kamikaze drones alone. And through all that, the Ukrainians are still likely going to maintain one of the advantages that made drone warfare so prevalent in the first place: cost disparity. Even when fully loaded, so to speak, the Dovbush T-10 with 6 kamikaze drones is much cheaper to mass produce and deploy than a military drone. The kamikaze drones have a practically insignificant price tag, considering they're made from commercial drones that often cost as little as a few $100s up to $3,000 for the more advanced models. The modified ordnance that's used on the drones are primarily grenades or artillery rounds, neither of which are particularly expensive to procure. In some cases, the Ukrainian military even gets more ordnance by raiding enemy positions after repelling Russian advances. Finally, there's the $12,000 price tag of the T-10 itself, considering that the modifications needed to convert the basic T-10 to one that can carry kamikaze drones are minimal, as it already had the carrying capacity and most of the technical equipment. The added costs are unlikely to be more than a few $1,000s. When put together, the entire loadout could be estimated to cost as little as $30,000 to up to $40,000 if we're being conservative. This still puts it miles ahead of traditional drones and missiles. For example, the Shahid 136, an Iranian drone that Russia frequently uses to conduct large-scale attacks, has an export cost of $193,000 per drone. The relative budget effectiveness of the Ukrainian drone industry is one of the few ways its military has managed to eke out somewhat of an advantage over Russia. With the drones being so cheap to produce, easy to deploy, difficult to intercept, yet effective at sniping targets over distances comparable to artillery, it's no wonder that Ukraine has managed to keep its war efforts up as long as it has. Speaking of artillery comparison, Russia has managed to maintain a consistent push into Ukraine's territory, precisely due to its advantage in modern artillery tactics and numbers. Russia basically outproduces the entire NATO pact in terms of artillery batteries and rounds, with an estimated 3 million rounds produced per year. Add to that the fact that North Korea has been found to supply Russia with more artillery rounds in the realm of 500,000 to 3 million across 6 months, and that's another 1 to 6 million rounds per year, assuming North Korea has kept a steady pace of manufacturing and exporting, which might not actually be true. The sheer influx of artillery rounds that Russia could use allows it to wage war over a significantly longer distance than a traditional foot soldier would allow it. However, artillery comes with an inherent cost. The artillery targeting systems used on both sides, despite significant improvements, are still unreliable. There's no certainty of whether they can hit a target, especially when approaching maximum range. Instead, Russia relies on saturation tactics, using a large number of batteries firing repeatedly to batter the Ukrainian side and spread the damage as far as possible. It's a tactic only made possible by Russia's overwhelming numbers and ammo availability. And yet, it doesn't seem to be working nearly as well as it needs for Russia to gain more ground. In contrast, first-person view drones are remarkably accurate due to the fact they are guided to their targets. They can chase and hit moving vehicles, drop bombs from a relatively safe height, and spot infantry with much more precision than long-range surveillance. All of these factors have influenced how both sides wage war. Tanks have been forced away from the front line itself, at least until drones are confirmed to be absent from it, or at least are not swarming the area. Russian tanks are so ineffective against drone-based tactics that its most modern tanks, the experimental T-14 Armata, have been rendered obsolete. The T-14 Armata was supposed to have the best protective plating out of any tank on the planet, while still having comparable mobility and armaments to modern Western tanks. And yet only 14 tanks ended up being finished in time to be deployed in the war. A few weeks after their first showcase on the front, reports streamed in of the Armatas being recalled from the war entirely. The answer, once again, lies in the prohibitive costs that tanks accrue compared to their efficiency. T-14s are estimated to cost around $5 to $9 million per vehicle, meaning losing a single tank to mere drone strikes would stagger Russia's military industry, backed by a couple of $1 million. While older tanks have even worse odds of surviving, they don't cost nearly as much and can be repaired much more easily at least. The infantry itself has also had a significant shift in how they approach the war. The recognizable buzz of propellers on commercial drones has become a telltale sign that an infantry squad has been spotted by an enemy drone and is likely going to be the next target. Infantrymen claim that the extensive use of drones on both sides of the conflict has made reinforcing dugouts and holding ground practically impossible, as there's no telling when and where a kamikaze or an ordnance-dropping drone might come from. And the most recent Ukrainian innovation will likely make the problem even worse. If the kamikaze drones only start flying after they are detached from the main T-10 mothership, the entire loadout is significantly more difficult to notice by sound alone. Add to that the T-10's ability to fly higher and over the FPV drones that Russia is using on the front line, and Ukraine has just significantly expanded its operational repertoire. In some ways, what Ukraine has made with this combination is a direct competitor to Russia's artillery. The T-10 has a range of around 25 miles, which is around the same range at which modern artillery that doesn't use guided missiles operates. At the same time, the drones could be significantly more accurate at that distance and not nearly as loud. But perhaps most importantly, the system functions as its own reconnaissance system. With artillery, the targeting, or rather target acquisition, comes from complementary surveillance systems such as drones, vehicles, and satellites. The artillery crew only calculates the trajectory the round will need to take and fires away, and once the shot is made, there's no way to reorient or take it back. In contrast, when using a drone that carries other, smaller drones, the operators remain fully in control from the beginning of the mission until the end. If the drone doesn't find a suitable target, it likely can turn back and start again after it recharges. And even when the drones are deployed, each unit is practically independent and can function for a mile or two out of the mothership, performing target acquisition and engagements in practically real time. There's one possible flaw to the current system that the Ukrainians have unveiled. The ordnance deployment system on the T-10 is irreversible and needs to be manually reset. This means that once a kamikaze drone is disengaged, it will need to find a target. Otherwise, the only real option for salvaging the drone would be to abort the entire operation and have the drones fly next to one another until they return to the operator. This is because the drone would eventually lose its network signal once it's sufficiently away from either the T-10 or the operator's system, where the range is highly unlikely to overlap in real-world scenarios. This means that every time a kamikaze drone is dispatched, it's a surefire loss for the Ukrainian military. Of course, if the drone manages to find a target and take out soldiers, destroy enemy vehicles, or compromise enemy positions, it's still a net positive for the Ukrainian military. But if it doesn't, the operator has to detonate it or risk giving Russia a free drone and ordnance they can reuse. However, despite the increased risk and cost of the new system, it still shows much more promise than the traditional use of kamikaze drones. However, despite the increased risk and cost of the new system, bear in mind that Ukraine is unlikely to completely forego using kamikaze drones directly on the front line for the new system either. A combination of the two is probably going to be even deadlier than before. With the T-10 acting as a relay for the drone network, even an empty one can still artificially increase the range of other drones in its vicinity, furthering its use cases on the battlefield. Additionally, depending on the network configuration, it's unclear how intercompatible two different drones are. In the most optimistic case, launching more than one T-10 would allow each of the kamikaze drones to effectively work in the cumulative network ranges that all T-10s cover, creating a much wider danger zone. And there are even more possibilities for the system to become deadlier with the advances in AI. One of the areas in which drones are already relatively effective, target acquisition, is what arguably makes them superior to other long-range options, such as the aforementioned artillery. However, actual statistics from the Ukrainian military suggest that the acquisition rate for drones seems to have faltered over the past few months. The reason for this is relatively simple. Russia has an extensive jamming network, and while the larger Dovbush T-10 is supposed to have countermeasures in place to prevent it from being jammed, The FPV Kamikaze drones are unlikely to be as advanced. This has led to the initial target strike rate dropping from 50% to 30%, with newer operators having a strike rate as low as 10%. It means that only 1 in 10 drones actually manages to detonate its ordnance when it locates a target. The Russian jamming systems typically work by preventing instructions from being passed between the operator and the drone. With the detonation being largely manual, it means that a jammed drone can harmlessly fall to the ground or be forced to detonate early. The proposed AI systems are designed to remove this vulnerability, upping the first strike rate to 80%. The AI advancement would allow the software to pick up human and most common vehicle signatures from the drone's camera feed. Then the system would outline potential targets for the operator to choose from. After an operator picks a target, the AI navigates the drone independently of the operator and detonates the ordnance. With the AI system being housed inside the drone and only the operator interface for target acquisition, the drone would have a much higher chance of successfully striking a target while under signal jammers. This works because the independence of the targeting and navigational systems would mean that the latter won't be affected by external factors. The most recent report from the end of October suggested that between 10,000 and 15,000 drone units were being outfitted with various versions of the AI systems, with multiple companies competing to place a successful product on the market. While the number might seem impressive, Ukraine is estimated to produce around 4 million drones per year, with most of them likely being the FPV Kamikaze drones. That means that the rollout of AI is actually slow compared to Ukraine's need for more effective targeting. There's also still uncertainty over whether the drones used for the Dovbush T-10 combined system will have AI installed in them when they inevitably start being deployed onto the battlefield. Ukraine might decide to test out the system more intensely before adding more components to it. Additionally, the Dovbush T-10 itself might get even more improvements. One of the proposed changes is to include separate air-to-surface munitions that the drone carries independently of its Kamikaze drone loadout. This would increase the drone's own operating capabilities. However, the big limiter here is the guidance technology for the munition and the drone's relatively small carrying capacity. Taking off with 6 drones and ordnance in tow is likely reaching the limit of how much the T-10 can carry, and severe modifications to the chassis could interfere with its speed, range, or maneuverability. But the other, more ambitious proposal is to improve the drone's operating range, with some sources suggesting a theoretical range of over 600 miles. This isn't unfeasible per se. Another Ukrainian military drone, the Skyton Raybird 3, has an estimated operating range of 150 miles, the distance it needs to stay connected to the nearest control link, and it's a similarly sized drone made for surveillance. Larger Kamikaze drones have technology that goes significantly over that number. If implemented, the entire system could be deployed at significantly longer distances, which would either allow Ukraine to keep its drone operators much safer, or give its military yet another long-range precision strike option. With the recent long-range drone strikes and the US-approved ATACMS systems, this would be the third iteration of a system that functions over 150 miles away. It would add much-needed redundancy to Ukraine's repertoire. But even without the additions of AI, more ammunition, or a greatly improved range, the newly unveiled system is an ingenious improvement that shows just how much Ukraine has managed to accomplish with limited assistance. It's only a matter of time until we start seeing reports about how Ukrainians have started using it to turn the tide of the war yet again. But what do you think? Will this new system make a significant difference to the war, or is a bit more testing and improvement needed to make it truly shine? It's bizarre, it's genius, and it's driving Russia crazy. Ukraine is using an ancient Roman weapon to stop modern tanks in their tracks. Time and again, Ukraine has turned creativity into its deadliest weapon, from transforming pickup trucks into nightmare-mobiles to turning hobby drones into flying bombs. They've proven that innovation beats brute force. They've even repaired captured Russian tanks, sometimes with the hilarious twist of calling Russian tech support for missing parts. But now, Ukraine is reaching back over 2,000 years for its latest battlefield surprise. Inspired by the Roman Empire, Ukrainian forces are rolling out an ancient tool that's cheap, simple, and devastatingly effective against Russian vehicles. Meet the Caltrop, a spiked trap straight from history that's proving Russia's modern war machine isn't so unstoppable after all. So how is this ancient weapon wreaking havoc on a 21st century battlefield? Let's break it down. This unassuming weapon has been used by armies for centuries, yet it rarely makes it into the pages of military history. But ask anyone unfortunate enough to encounter one underfoot or under a vehicle, and they'll tell you, this thing is unforgettable. A caltrop is deceptively simple. A handful of jagged spikes arranged so that no matter how it lands, one point is always sticking up. A real-life weaponized geometry puzzle. A caltrop is classified as an area denial weapon, a tool used not to destroy outright, but to slow, disrupt, and endanger. Picture a field seeded with these, and you can imagine the chaos they create. punctured tires, immobilized vehicles, and disrupted supply lines. While weapons like poison gas and landmines draw fierce criticism for their lasting effects, the caltrop remains oddly uncontroversial. It's not glorious, it's not flashy, but it works, and its design has remained basically the same for centuries. In fact, the basic concept dates back to ancient Rome, when soldiers used four-pointed jagged irons to stop advancing enemies in their tracks. Over time, this simple yet ingenious weapon acquired a plethora of names, each reflecting its shape, function, or regional influence. The modern term caltrop comes from the Old English calcatrip, meaning heel trap, a nod to its painful purpose. The Romans, practical as ever, called it murex feraeus, or jagged iron, drawing a comparison to the spiked shells of the murex mollusk, which was prized for its purple dye. Another Roman name, tribulus, linked it to the Greek tribolos, meaning four-side or tetrahedron. This name stuck and later inspired the scientific name of a plant, Tribulus terrestris, whose spiky seed pods bear an uncanny resemblance to the caltrop's sharp design. The French dubbed it chaussée trapée, or shoe trap, while elsewhere it became known as crow's foot or jack rock. Across centuries and continents, the caltrop reappeared in military strategies from Europe to Asia and North Africa, even making its way to the New World, as you'll hear later on in the video. No matter its name, its purpose was always the same: to maim, immobilize, and deny ground to advancing enemies. The caltrop's cruel simplicity was originally designed to halt the primary means of advance for men and horses: feet. Roman versions were jagged and deliberately shaped so that a point would lodge firmly in a horse's hoof, causing pain and rendering the animal useless in battle. The same principle extends to soldiers, who risked debilitating injuries if they stepped on the sharp spikes. A simple step could mean lacerations, puncture wounds, or infections that would take them out of the fight. Modern interpretations have broadened the caltrop's purpose. As a less lethal weapon, it's not explicitly designed to kill but rather incapacitate personnel or disable equipment like tires. This categorization aligns with the broader definition of non-lethal weapons: devices meant to repel or immobilize without causing widespread destruction or fatalities. However, as the US Department of Defense notes, even non-lethal weapons carry the risk of severe injury or death, making less lethal a more accurate term. It's also important to clarify that caltrops, despite their stealth and injurious nature, are not classified as booby traps. While they injure or damage by surprise, their design doesn't meet the legal definition of a booby trap under the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. A booby trap is defined as a device intended to kill or injure when a person disturbs or interacts with something that is designed to appear harmless, such as a toy or a watch. Caltrops, in contrast, are neither disguised nor deceptive. Their small size, typically 3 to 5 inches in length, doesn't mask their aggressive, spiked appearance, which warns of their dangerous purpose. They're also passive devices, not rigged with explosives or triggered by unsuspecting actions. Harm results only when an object applies enough force to come into direct contact with the spikes. This clear distinction ensures that caltrops, when used as intended, avoid the ethical and legal concerns associated with booby traps. Instead, they remain firmly in the category of straightforward yet devastatingly effective tools for immobilizing enemies and denying access. But their simple design and effectiveness are just some of the caltrop's benefits. These unassuming spikes offer a multitude of advantages that make them an ideal choice for Ukrainian forces battling a numerically superior and heavily equipped Russian military. For starters, caltrops are incredibly simple to manufacture and deploy. Unlike advanced weaponry that requires significant time, resources, and expertise, caltrops can be produced cheaply in large quantities. This aligns perfectly with Ukraine's need for cost-effective solutions to counter Russia's larger war machine. Whether scattered across roads, fields, or supply routes, they require no special training or maintenance, making them accessible to any unit in the field. Their portability is another major advantage. Lightweight and easy to carry, caltrops can be transported by foot soldiers or vehicles and quickly scattered in key locations to disrupt enemy movement. And unlike other area denial weapons, they don't need explosives, fuel, or complicated deployment mechanisms to be effective. The caltrop's passive nature is one of its most defining traits. Once in place, it works tirelessly without intervention, puncturing tires, maiming infantry, and even halting heavy vehicles equipped with pneumatic tires. Historically, it's immobilized everything from soldiers and horses to elephants and camels. On Ukraine's modern battlefield, the same principles are proving equally effective against Russian military convoys, supply trucks, and armored vehicles. In a war where mobility is everything, the caltrop's ability to cause delays and force detours is a strategic asset. For Ukraine, whose tactics rely heavily on ambushes and nimble operations, slowing the enemy's advance, even momentarily, can make the difference between victory and retreat. However, caltrops are not without their drawbacks. and some of these limitations are particularly relevant to Ukraine's current situation. One of the most significant challenges lies in the persistence of caltrops in the environment. Unlike modern landmines that can be designed to self-neutralize or self-destruct, caltrops remain indefinitely hazardous until actively removed. This creates a long-term risk for civilians, especially in areas where combat has ceased but scattered caltrops remain. Ukraine, already grappling with the widespread devastation of its infrastructure and displacement of its population, might face increased post-war clearance obligations. These operations are not only costly and time-consuming, but also pose ongoing safety risks to civilians and even the demining teams themselves. From a legal and ethical standpoint, the indiscriminate nature of caltrops can complicate their use. While targeting enemy vehicles and personnel aligns with the rules of distinction and proportionality under the law of armed conflict, the reality of war often makes it challenging to prevent harm to non-combatants entirely. In urban or heavily trafficked rural areas, the risk of civilians inadvertently encountering caltrops increases, raising critical questions about proportionality and the feasibility of precautions to mitigate harm. Thus, deploying caltrops effectively without causing unintended injuries, especially to friendly forces, requires careful planning. Unsurprisingly, Ukraine has found a way to deploy caltrops safely, a way that combines old-school ingenuity with cutting-edge tech, and it's nothing short of brilliant. So what is this groundbreaking tactic? One word: drones. Ukraine is modifying drones to drop caltrops across key roads, creating chaos for Russian supply trucks. While the concept of drone-dropped caltrops has been theorized before, Ukraine's execution is the first significant use of this method in an armed conflict. And these sharp, tire-popping spikes aren't just a nuisance, they're a full-on roadblock. Once Russian vehicles stop or slow down, they become easy prey for Ukraine's first-person view (FPV) Kamikaze drones, which swoop in for the kill. It's a devastating one-two punch. This synergy between caltrops and drones has not only halted Russian convoys, but also introduced a new level of psychological warfare. Supply truck drivers, already anxious about aerial attacks, now face the additional threat of invisible, tire-shredding traps littering the roads. And these traps can't be avoided by making the supply runs at night. The caltrops are always there, just waiting to cause tire blowouts and even crashes. As a result, the psychological toll on Russian forces is immense. As one Russian blogger described the situation, "The enemy keeps coming up with new nasty things. Not only do they drop mines from drones, but they literally cover dangerous sections of frontline roads with spikes. And these nasty things aren't just frustrating, they're outright terrifying." The added danger of caltrops forces Russian drivers to take unnecessary risks. The same Russian blogger revealed the frantic measures they have to take. "For safety reasons, we have to literally fly through these areas and drive at maximum possible speed. And imagine what happens to a car when 2 or more wheels are immediately punctured by spikes. The fear is palpable." The Russian blogger continues his lament. "In these places, enemy drones are waiting for their prey, and as soon as the vehicle stops, an enemy bird immediately appears and drops bombs. Insidious bastards." The enemy bird in question, of course, refers to the FPV drones, which turn an already dangerous situation into an even greater nightmare. The constant threat of drone strikes, combined with the ever-present hazard of caltrops, creates a sense of imminent danger that no soldier wants to face. The ultimate goal? To stop the Russian vehicles from entering specific areas. One of the locations where caltrops are currently deployed is the Rivne Oblast, some 210 miles west of Kyiv. This area is home to the Rivne nuclear power plant, which is likely to become one of Russia's next targets. The area was already affected by the late November 2024 aerial attacks, which cut off electricity for at least 280,000 people in the western Rivne region. While caltrops can't defend against a massive barrage of 100 drones and 90 missiles, they can stop, or at least delay, Russian vehicles from entering Rivne to cause even more damage. That's why caltrops chained together are now placed at every checkpoint in Rivne. In some cases, Ukrainian forces also deploy larger caltrops by hand, positioning them strategically in areas where they anticipate Russian movements. For instance, large and heavy caltrops have been seen lining the streets of Kyiv to prevent Russian tanks from moving through the city. These versions are often handcrafted and produced in makeshift workshops. As such, they serve as a testament to Ukraine's resourcefulness and ability to adapt traditional tactics to their advantage. However, Ukraine's ingenuity extends beyond makeshift workshops. Professional manufacturers have also stepped in to produce these critical weapons at scale. Introducing Art of Steel, a Ukrainian manufacturer that's quickly adapted its operations to meet the demands of war. Traditionally known for crafting silver chainmail, helmets, and other medieval armor for reenactments and shows, the company has pivoted to produce caltrops for the Ukrainian armed forces. As one official from the company shared, "Ukrainians are united in this war. Absolutely everyone is trying to help in the fighting places and in the rear. Since the war's escalation, Art of Steel's skilled blacksmiths have produced hundreds of these caltrops, transforming their expertise in historical weaponry into a vital resource for the modern battlefield. The shop's swift adaptation perfectly captures Ukraine's resourcefulness in the face of adversity. Within days of the invasion, Art of Steel had already welded dozens of these metal devices, and the company wasn't even instructed to do so. A blacksmith at Art of Steel took inspiration from an online idea to place caltrops at barriers and checkpoints and volunteered to begin production. That should tell you everything you need to know about the Ukrainian spirit. Art of Steel's effort is just part of a broader, nationwide movement where metal workers, volunteers, and ordinary citizens have come together to support the Ukrainian forces. From creating body armor plates to filling bottles with materials for Molotov cocktails, Ukrainians are tapping into every resource available. Mark Kanchian, a senior advisor with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, observed, "There's a little of that flavor of getting the whole population involved," reminiscent of the scrap metal drives in the US during World War II. But it's not just the modern ingenuity of Ukraine that echoes past wars. As mentioned, caltrops have a long history of being used to disrupt and disarm enemies, going back to ancient battles. But there's a reason why caltrops didn't remain confined to ancient warfare. With this in mind, let's take a journey through the history of caltrops up to the Drone Age caltrops seen in Ukraine. The earliest recorded use of caltrops dates back to 331 BC, during the Battle of Gaugamela, where Alexander the Great faced off against Persian king Darius III. Historians like Polyaenus described how Darius sewed crow's feet in front of his army to impede Alexander's forces. Though it was Alexander's tactical brilliance that allowed him to maneuver around these devices and win the battle, it was clear that these spike-filled traps had a disruptive potential that would last millennia. As military engineering advanced, the Romans adopted caltrops into their own warfare tactics. The Roman legions, known for their discipline and adaptability, used caltrops to great effect against their enemies. One of the most notable early uses was in the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, where Roman soldiers deployed caltrops to thwart the heavy cavalry of the Parthians. Interestingly, while Julius Caesar didn't use caltrops in the famous Siege of Alesia in 52 BC, his legions were equipped with similar devices, wooden blocks with iron hooks, designed to slow down enemy advances. This demonstrated the Romans' pragmatic approach to warfare, utilizing whatever tools that would allow them to maintain control of the battlefield. By the Middle Ages, caltrops had significantly evolved, with European blacksmiths perfecting the design. The traditional ball shape was replaced by a simpler, more efficient version, 4 sharp iron spikes arranged in a tetrahedron. This innovation made the devices easier to mass-produce and more effective on the battlefield. One of the most dramatic medieval uses of caltrops occurred during the reign of Genghis Khan. In 1213, as he advanced on the Qin Empire of China, Genghis Khan encountered vast stretches of land around the Chuyungquan Pass that were heavily defended by caltrops. According to historical records, the Chinese deployed caltrops in large numbers, hoping to impede Mongol advances. Despite the challenge, the Mongols were able to eventually break through using their superior mobility and tactics, although the caltrops slowed them down significantly. Meanwhile, caltrops continued to see widespread use throughout Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. During the Crusades, for example, they were used by both European and Islamic forces to protect fortifications and disrupt enemy supply lines. This period also saw the widespread use of caltrops to protect vulnerable camp areas and prevent surprise attacks, especially during night operations. As warfare evolved and the use of gunpowder was introduced, caltrops took on a new role, one that reflected the changing nature of military strategy. The Renaissance brought innovations, including Leonardo da Vinci's design for a caltrop-throwing machine, which would have allowed armies to launch caltrops with greater precision over longer distances. Despite the growing use of firearms, the caltrop remained a viable option for defending against cavalry charges, as their ability to disable horses was unmatched. The caltrop even found its way into the New World, with the first English settlers in Jamestown, Virginia. In the 17th century, these spiked devices were used to protect the early colonies from Native American attacks and potential Spanish incursions. Although only a few examples have been discovered in Jamestown, the presence of caltrops in the colony reflects their enduring military value. Fast forward to the 20th century, and caltrops were also seen in World War I. Occasionally, they were collected as keepsakes or exchanged for bullets. However, they were also used for their primary purpose, to disable horses. During World War II, they remained in use, but their purpose again changed. The introduction of pneumatic tires made the caltrop a highly effective weapon against trucks, tanks, and other military vehicles. During the war, the Allies and the Axis powers both used caltrops extensively. The Allied resistance fighters in Europe were supplied with mass-produced caltrops by the British Special Operations Executive and the American Office of Strategic Services. They were able to do so as these devices were simple to make, easy to distribute, and highly effective at slowing down or immobilizing German vehicles, particularly on roads in occupied territories. Resistance fighters scattered the caltrops on roads, either as a harassment tactic or as a prelude to ambushes. However, the German fighters didn't just sit idly by. They also developed their own version of the caltrop made from sheet metal and dropped from canisters via aircraft. Each canister contained hundreds of these spiked devices, which were designed to disable both vehicles and aircraft. One canister could disperse as many as 1,000 caltrops over a wide area, causing chaos and disruption behind enemy lines. Just as the Ukrainians are doing now, the Germans also used larger and bulkier versions of caltrops. These devices, known as Dragon's Teeth and Czech Hedgehogs, primarily served as anti-tank obstacles. The famous opening scenes in the 1998 epic war film Saving Private Ryan, depicting the storming of Omaha Beach, show the effectiveness of these types of obstacles in limiting the mobility of landing forces. In the post-World War II era, caltrops continue to be used in various conflicts, including the Vietnam War. The nature of this conflict, with its dense jungles and rugged terrain, made the caltrop a useful tool for both sides. The US military and North Vietnamese army both use these devices to slow down foot soldiers and vehicles. By the 21st century, caltrops had largely fallen out of common use in open battlefield scenarios. However, they eventually found new relevance in the complex urban and asymmetrical warfare that characterized conflicts such as the Iraq War. US military personnel began using these spiked devices to slow or stop vehicles used as car bombs attempting to bypass checkpoints. This usage was especially effective in controlling traffic at military posts or securing sensitive areas, such as roads leading to vital infrastructure. Caltrops made such an impact on the US military that they still retain a symbolic significance. For instance, the US Army's 3rd Armored Corps and the 3rd Marine Division incorporate caltrop imagery into their insignias, highlighting the device's historical and ongoing importance as a defensive tool. However, neither the US nor Ukraine were the first to introduce the concept of drone-age caltrops. That honor belongs to China. In 2019, a hexacopter drone designed to drop caltrops was showcased at a military expo in China. Though this innovation highlighted the potential of drones to deliver unconventional payloads in modern conflict scenarios, it wasn't exactly a groundbreaking revelation. It was simply a strategic response to the need for low-cost, precise, and effective area denial tactics. At the same expo, another hexacopter was displayed, equipped with a machine gun. This innovation showed the increasing versatility and potential for drones to act as autonomous or semi-autonomous weapons platforms. However, Ukraine was the first to go beyond presentations and theory. The country's brave fighters demonstrated the real-world battlefield applications of such concepts. They demonstrated that even in the age of advanced technology, low-tech solutions can still have a huge impact. Caltrops are far from obsolete. They're a real force multiplier on the battlefield. That's why the future of caltrops in the Ukraine conflict is ripe with potential. As drones continue to evolve, their capabilities in terms of precision, payload delivery, and tactical versatility will undoubtedly inspire even more creative uses of caltrops on the battlefield. Drones have already demonstrated their ability to deliver modified grenades, mines, and even small robots throughout the war in Ukraine. They've done everything from instilling fear in the Russian soldiers to facilitating surrender. This versatility ensures that even caltrops, when deployed via drones, are just the beginning of what's possible. But even if Ukraine restricts drone delivery to caltrops, it's sure to do a lot of damage. After all, these lightweight tools are uniquely suited for drone deployment, easy to manufacture and highly effective in disrupting logistics and mobility. They can also be deployed rapidly in response to battlefield needs without relying on scarce or difficult-to-source resources. And in a war that has already cost Ukraine hundreds of billions of dollars and up to around 400,000 soldiers, every advantage matters. But what do you think? How much of an advantage do caltrops offer to the Ukrainian troops? And where do you see their use going in the future? August 26, 2024, Russia, still reeling from Ukraine's successful invasion of Kursk, is looking for a way to hit back. The response comes on this date, with Russia launching a large-scale missile and drone attack across Ukraine involving both cruise and ballistic missiles. It's among the largest missile strikes on Ukrainian territory since the war began. A massive volley of at least 127 missiles and 109 drones peppered the Ukrainian skies in an attack that lasted more than 8 hours. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was quick to condemn the strike, saying, "And like most Russian strikes, this one is just as dastardly, targeting civilian infrastructure." before adding a key point: Russian President Vladimir Putin can only do what the world allows him to do. That final point is a reference to Zelensky's constant calls for permission to use the long-range missiles its Western allies have provided to strike Russia on its own territory. That permission, specifically from the United States, has not come yet, with Ukraine limited to using American weapons to strike Russian territory near the Kharkiv region. It can't use missiles to strike deeper into Russia, yet. That may all be on the verge of changing as Ukraine starts a slow move away from relying on externally provided weapons. It's building a weapon of its own, completely homemade, and more than capable of striking Russia at its heart, while giving Zelensky and his troops a key advantage that could ultimately spell game over for Putin's special military operation. What is that homemade weapon? That's the question we will answer in this video as we examine the 2 missiles Ukraine is currently producing, what's made that production possible, and what having these new weapons will mean for Ukraine. But before all of that, we need to look at the background behind why these weapons matter, specifically in terms of how missiles have offered Russia such a massive advantage over Ukraine. The barrage on August 26th is far from the first time Russia has used missiles to strike Ukrainian cities. In fact, the tactic has been a feature of Putin's strategy. On February 22, 2024, the second anniversary of the beginning of Putin's special military operation, Ukrainian spokesperson Yuri Inhut pointed out that Russia had launched over 8,000 missiles during 2 years of war. That amounts to around 77 missiles per week, with many of those missile strikes being accompanied by drones. A staggering 4,630 of them, in fact, with Inhut claiming that Ukraine has managed to destroy 3,605 of those drones during the first 2 years of the war. Still, it's clear that a key Putin tactic is to constantly bombard Ukrainian cities and infrastructure with missiles, heavily burdening the country's anti-air defenses in the process. Russia claims that it only targets military facilities and energy infrastructure with these attacks. The August 26th strike demonstrates otherwise. Russian missiles have been just as destructive in major Ukrainian population hubs as they've been for the country's military locations. And it gets worse for Ukraine. While it finds itself unable to respond to these missile strikes with missiles of its own, Russia is looking further afield to keep the barrages going. On the same day that Inhut released the figures of the sheer volume of missiles his country has to face from Russia, the Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, revealed that some of these missiles aren't of Russian origin. According to the SBU, several missile attacks launched by Russia in December 2023 involved the use of Hwasong-11 missiles from North Korea, with those missiles having injured at least 100 people while killing around 24 more. The SBU presented evidence to back up its statements, producing Hwasong-11 missile debris it claims it had found on the battlefield. The SBU says that these missiles have been used as part of the shelling of the Zaporizhia region in December 2023, with strikes against Kyiv and Kharkiv in early 2024, also featuring North Korean missiles. Add to all of this, February 2024, also marking the first time that Russia used its Zircon hypersonic missile in Ukraine, and you can see the vital role missile strikes have played in Putin's strategy. All the while, Ukraine has been unable to respond. It had to rely on anti-air defenses, including a pair of Patriot missile defense systems, to try to protect its people as best it could. But outside of using missiles to attack Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014 and is still considered to be Ukrainian sovereign territory by much of the international community, Ukraine hasn't been able to fight fire with fire. Ukraine's allies have already provided some long-range weapons at this point. However, Ukraine hasn't been allowed to use them offensively. And that's been a sore point for Zelensky throughout the war. The Ukrainian president's call to be able to use the missiles its allies are providing to hit Russia in its own territory has been constant and, up until now, largely unanswered. The most recent of these calls came during a September 2024 meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, or UDCG. Held at Germany's Ramstein Air Base, the UDCG meeting saw Zelensky say that Ukraine needs to have this long-range capability, not only on the divided territory of Ukraine, but also on the Russian territory, so that Russia is motivated to seek peace. As has so often been the case, Zelensky received mild pushback from his allies. Al Jazeera reports that US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin subtly claimed that these long-range capabilities weren't needed, as he confirmed that the US would be providing an additional $250 million in military aid. He said that Russia had moved its glide bombs so far back from the front lines that they will be out of the range of American-made ATACMS missiles. What's more, Austin said Ukraine itself has significant capabilities to attack Russia in its own territory that will go well beyond the range of ATACMS or the British-made Storm Shadow missiles. Austin concluded by telling Al Jazeera that America will give everything we can, but not necessarily everything that Zelensky wants. There are a couple of ways we can read into Austin's comments. The first is how they appear on the surface. America's Defense Secretary seems to be telling Ukraine that it's achieved plenty of success using drones to strike deep into Russian territory. That's true. June 2024 alone saw Ukraine strike 4 Russian oil refineries with drones, with regular attacks in the Black Sea also allowing Ukraine to stop the offensive threat Russia presents from Crimea. To Austin and many of Ukraine's allies, the ability to carry out these drone-based attacks means Ukraine can already strike Russia at range. Add to that the early August invasion of Kursk, and Ukraine appears to be making a good argument for why it doesn't need long-range missiles at all. Zelensky disagrees. However, the second interpretation of Austin's comments could be that he knows something that the rest of the world doesn't. The US doesn't need to supply Ukraine with ATACMS missiles or allow them to use those missiles in Russia because Ukraine is on its way to building perfectly capable missiles of its own. And that brings us to the new Ukrainian homemade weapons. On August 26, 2024, the DW News YouTube channel published a report on Ukraine's efforts to produce its own long-range missiles. While President Zelensky lobbies for these restrictions to be lifted, Ukraine is also building its own guided missiles in the hope of one day becoming self-sufficient, the report claimed. In truth, that self-sufficiency may have come much earlier in the war, were it not for precise Russian strikes conducted in April 2022. In that month, Russia used its missiles to take out a factory that was capable of producing the same guided missiles that Ukraine is now on the verge of being able to produce once again, forcing Zelensky to make repeated pleas to his Western allies to allow him to use the missiles they provide in Russia. The strike put a severe dent in Ukraine's missile production capacities. However, DW News notes that the plant has been rebuilt and likely fortified with anti-air defenses, meaning Ukraine is now preparing to produce 2 missiles that could be real game changers in the war: the Vilka missile system and the Neptune guided cruise missile. Hints of these production capabilities first arrived in July 2024. In a short report, the TASS Russian news agency quoted Zelensky as saying, "Apart from drones, yes, we are dealing with other systems that will give us the opportunity to have a longer range. There has been some research and development." ABC built on the DW News report in late August, revealing that restarting production on the Vilka and Neptune systems wasn't all that Ukraine was up to. The research and development Zelensky mentioned in July 2024 has resulted in the creation of a missile drone dubbed the Palyanytsia, which is named after a traditional type of Ukrainian bread. That name also has a special meaning to Ukraine due to it being so difficult to pronounce that it was able to use it to weed out Russian spies during the early stages of the war. Now the name will take on a whole new meaning as it will symbolize what Zelensky calls a new class of weapon. The point here is simple. Sooner or later, Ukraine won't have to rely on its allies to provide missiles and also beg them for permission to use those missiles in Russian territory. It's building its own, a series of missiles upon which no restrictions can be placed. That brings us to another question. Just what type of damage is this trio of missiles capable of inflicting? We'll start with the Vilka. A Ukrainian-designed heavy multiple rocket launcher, the Vilka fires guided missiles and is based on the BM-30 Smerch design. It's also got a new launcher. The system entered the Ukrainian armed forces back in 2018. The weapon weighs 33 tons and is crewed by 4 people, with it firing 300mm caliber missiles from its 12 barrels. It's also road mobile. The Vilka is equipped with a YAMZ 7511.10 turbocharged engine that can get to wherever it needs to go in order to fire on Russian positions. The problem for Ukraine hasn't been that it didn't have these launchers available. Rather, Russia's April 2022 attack on its manufacturing plant rendered the Vilka useless because Ukraine didn't have the missiles the weapon could fire. Those missiles are dubbed Vilka Ms and they can travel for up to 80 miles. As such, they're not the rangiest of missiles in the new Ukrainian homemade arsenal, though they can certainly fly far enough to cause problems behind the war's front lines. Those missiles are also cleverly designed. They use a GPS-free guidance system, which makes them immune to the type of satellite navigation jamming that can send GPS-guided missiles off course. They're also versatile. A Vilka M rocket can accept several types of warheads, with the rocket's inertial correction system ensuring the stabilization needed to keep the rocket on course. Ukraine demonstrated how it could put these missiles to good use in January 2024. That's when Ukraine conducted a firing test for its missile system, which showed that a Vilka rocket is capable of traveling significantly further than rockets fired via the M142 HIMARS systems the US has provided. Ukrainian ground forces are also reported to have used the Vilka system during their January 2024 attack on Belgorod, which you may recognize as one of the latest regions Ukraine has invaded since it experienced such success in Kursk. With its production facilities back up and running, Ukraine now has the ability to create rockets it needs for its Vilka system. That means we're likely to see a lot more of this launcher as we approach the end of 2024 and move into 25. Most worryingly for Putin, the Vilka is arguably the weakest of the 3 homemade weapons Ukraine is set to bring to the war. Far more damaging to Russia will be the R-360 Neptune guided cruise missile. Like the Vilka system, the Neptune isn't a brand new weapon. It was first introduced during the 2015 Arms and Security exhibition in Kyiv, with its first flight believed to have taken place sometime in mid-2016. With 2017 came further tests as the Neptune was put through its paces alongside the Vilka missile system, though the results of those tests weren't made public. That typically indicates that the tests showed tweaks were needed to get the missile up and running. Another test came in August 2018, this time supported by reports that the missile successfully hit a target at a range of 62 miles. More successful tests came in 2019, which is the same year that the missile was officially signed off. It would start getting delivered to the Ukrainian military in the same year. The missile has made numerous headlines since the beginning of Putin's special military operation. Early in the war, Ukraine used it to hit the Russian cruiser Moskva, with the attack ultimately leading to the sinking of one of the largest ships since World War II. More ships in the Black Sea have also been victims of Neptune missile attacks, including the Konstantin Olshansky and the Kamuna. As for the missile itself, it weighs 1,920 pounds and has an operational range of between 120 and 190 miles. It's capable of reaching subsonic speeds while delivering a warhead weighing 330 pounds. But by now you may have a question. If Ukraine has been using the Neptune since the beginning of the war, why is it being feared as a new homemade weapon? One word: modifications. In April 2024, Army Recognition reported on Ukrainian plans to extend the range of its Neptune cruise missile so that it could fly for up to 610 miles, all while it revealed that it planned to boost production tenfold. That enhanced range would allow the Neptune to strike deeper into the Black Sea region, perhaps even allowing it to reach ships docked in Crimea, and would make it invaluable for striking Russian territory if Ukraine were ever able to create a version of it that could strike land targets. That's precisely what Ukraine has done. On August 20, 2024, Army Recognition reported that Ukraine had successfully developed a version of the R-360 Neptune that's capable of traveling up to 248 miles and has been tweaked so that it can strike land targets as readily as it can hit ships at sea. The new version of the missile has even seen action already. It was reportedly used in a late-night attack on the Chelino military airfield near Kursk just a week before Ukraine launched its invasion into the oblast. So Ukraine is now capable of producing 2 types of missiles. When combined, they're capable of striking targets on both land and at sea. With the Neptune, they also have a missile that offers a good amount of range, with that range potentially being extended to over 600 miles if Zelensky's plans are anything to go by. Finally, there's the new homemade weapon. The weapon could prove superior to the ATACMS long-range missiles Ukraine so desperately wants to be able to use in Russia, the Palyantsia. Not much is known about the Palyantsia at the time of writing. When reporting on the new homemade missile, ABC News speculated that the missile would have a range of up to 430 miles, which would put it on par with the ATACMS, allowing it to solve the problems that come with Ukraine not having permission to use American-made missiles inside Russia. Ukraine's defense minister Rustem Umerov also posted about the Palyantsia on his Facebook page, noting that Ukraine is preparing its response when talking about Russia's missile attacks in late August. Weapons of its own production are coming, claims Umerov, who shared the post alongside a map showing several Russian airfields, including the Savalslyka Air Base. This led ABC News to speculate that the upcoming missile would be capable of hitting over 20 Russian airfields from Ukraine, which would put a severe dent in Russia's aerial capabilities. Speaking about the missile with the Associated Press, Mikhailo Fedorov, who serves Ukraine as its technology minister, said, "I think this will be a game changer because we will be able to strike where Russia doesn't expect it today." In other words, the Palyantsia could be seen as an expansion of the tactics Ukraine has adopted since the Kursk invasion. Defending territory is not the only thing Ukraine can do. It's going to attack Russia on its own soil, forcing Putin to completely rethink how he approaches the war that he started. The Kyiv Independent provides more details about Ukraine's revolutionary new missile drone. It quoted a defense expert named Andriy Karuk, who claims that the weapon is essentially a new type of cruise missile, because a cruise missile is an unmanned aerial vehicle with a rocket or, in this case, turbojet engine. Karuk notes that the Palyantsia is a fairly small missile too, likely meaning it will carry an explosive charge in the few tens of kilograms range rather than the several hundred seen in a standard cruise missile. Other analysts dispute Karuk's claims that the Palyantsia is essentially a cruise missile. One of them is Federico Borsari, who works at the Center for European Policy Analysis. He says the Palianitsia isn't a cruise missile because missiles fly at higher speed compared to what we know about the Palianitsia. Instead, he says it's more like a one-way drone that shares some of the characteristics typically seen in a cruise missile. Finally, Alexander Dmitriev, who is an advisor on unmanned automated systems to Ukraine's ground forces commander, highlights the key difference between the Palianitsia and a standard cruise missile. The target of a cruise missile cannot be corrected during the flight, but a drone's can, he says. That's basically the difference. In short, the Palianitsia will be able to pack a larger punch than any of Ukraine's current drones, and it will do so while taking advantage of the same electronic control technology that makes drones so flexible. So the Palianitsia is not innovative in the sense that it's introducing brand new technologies to the Ukrainian battlefield. Rather, its innovations lie in remarkable new uses of technology that already exist. The electronic control technology is adapted from traditional drones, while the lifting wings and jet-powered engines come from existing cruise missiles. Put them all together and you get a missile that brings range, explosive power, and the ability to change its target based on an operator's commands. That's terrifying for Putin. With the Palianitsia, Ukraine completes a trio of homemade weapons that look set to devastate Russia. But that brings us to another question. When are we likely to see these missiles become common fixtures in the Ukraine war? Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries, Alexander Kamyshin, provided some insight during an interview with DW News. When asked how long he thinks it will be before Ukraine becomes self-sufficient, he revealed that it's not production capabilities that are stopping it from doing so, it's money. At this point, we're ramping up local production, but for almost a year, we've been facing a scarce deficit of local government funding because the capabilities to produce are almost 3 times higher than the funding available. In other words, Ukraine has been capable of producing its own weapons, from a manufacturing standpoint, throughout Putin's special military operation. The one thing holding it back is that it hasn't been able to attract the investment needed to produce those weapons. That is now changing. According to Kamyshin, Ukraine and Denmark have come up with a novel mechanism that will allow Ukraine to build the Palianitsia, along with its other missiles, without having to worry about restrictions. Denmark is going to procure from Ukrainian manufacturers and donate to the Ukrainian army, claims the Minister of Strategic Industries. With this help, we can scale up faster because, as I told you, our capabilities are higher than the funding available. Ironically, the agreement to create this mechanism was made at the very UDCG conference during which Zelensky made his most recent plea for Western countries to allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons inside Russia. On June 14th, Ukraine's government portal website offered further details, including a quote from Troelsland Poulsen, who serves as Denmark's defense minister. In addition to committing to support Ukraine's efforts to defend itself for the next decade, Poulsen said, "We are taking the lead in responding to a direct request from Ukraine to ensure that investments are made in Ukraine's defense industry in the near future." Ukraine's Rustem Umerov was also quick to laud the project, noting Ukraine's gratitude to Denmark for taking what he calls a great step in supporting the Ukrainian arms industry through direct investment. Denmark's investment is part of the Zaboyari Manufacturing Freedom Project, which aims to raise $10 billion for Ukrainian arms development by the end of 2024. The Danes' contribution is small compared to the goal, just $28.5 million, but the project as a whole offers Ukraine's allies a brand new way of supporting it. That will worry Putin. He has relied on Ukraine not being able to use missiles in Russia because those missiles come from countries that are wary of crossing a red line and provoking the Russian leader further. Now Ukraine has developed a mechanism through which countries can support its efforts to use missiles in Russia indirectly without having to provide weapons of their own. And that program is going to help Ukraine to develop the Palianitsia, along with its other homemade missiles, so that it can take the fight to Russia. Speaking about the Palianitsia to DW News, Alexander Kamyshin hailed it as a first-in-class Ukrainian product that's fully locally designed and manufactured. He also delivered a stark warning to Putin. That's the first one to go. Others will follow, and you will see how much we can make. In other words, Ukraine has more ideas in the pipeline. It just needs financial support from its allies to turn those ideas into reality. So what does all of this mean for Putin and his special military operation? For one, it means he can no longer rely on Ukraine only being able to fight against his forces on their own soil. That strategy was already thrown out of the window with the Kursk invasion, which has given Putin a massive problem he needs to solve as Ukraine continues to take and hold Russian territory. Following that up with an invasion of Belgorod means that Putin's headache turns into a full-blown migraine. He has to commit substantial amounts of soldiers and equipment to those areas to try and drive Ukraine out. Now throw Ukraine's Palianitsia into the mix, along with the other missiles it's producing, and Putin has even more issues to counter. The war is no longer about him throwing man after man at Ukraine's fortified positions in an attempt to slowly steal territory out from under Zelensky's nose. Putin's own country, the country he claims to be able to protect as he projects his strongman image, is under direct threat. People are being evacuated, territory is being taken, and now with funding from Denmark and the likelihood of future funding from its other allies, Ukraine has developed a homegrown way to finally be able to use missiles deep inside Russian territory. That puts Putin's military installations close to the front lines at risk. Remember that the Palianitsia is capable of hitting around 20 airfields in Russian territory already, and it could ultimately be the factor that forces Putin to the negotiating table. That has been Zelensky's goal all along. He has constantly called for tangible coercion of Russia to force it into negotiating a peace that will see Putin restore the land Russia has stolen from Ukraine, which includes Crimea. That coercion can't come from international pressure alone, Ukraine's leader believes, and now he has a weapon, several in fact, that nobody can stop him from using inside Russia. The Palianitsia promises to completely change the face of the Ukraine war, to the point where it may be capable of ending Putin's special military operation. But what do you think about this unique combination of drone and missile? Will Ukraine be able to produce it in high enough numbers to truly threaten Russia? Are other countries going to follow Denmark's lead by donating to the Zoboyari Manufacturing Freedom Project? When war forces innovation, something extraordinary happens, and Ukraine's FrankenSAM is proof of that. This hybrid air defense system is so effective on the battlefield that even the US, with its vast military arsenal, now wants it. What began as Ukraine's ingenious response to overwhelming Russian airstrikes has turned into a powerful weapon that's caught the eye of the world's most advanced military. But what makes FrankenSAM so revolutionary, and why has it become such a coveted asset for the US? As we dive into its origins, its impact on Ukraine's defenses, and how it's reshaping modern warfare, one thing becomes clear. When necessity meets innovation, even the strongest militaries take notice. Let's dive in. FrankenSAM, as you've probably guessed, is a mashup of the words Frankenstein and SAM, or surface-to-air missile. On July 8, 2024, the Senate Armed Services Committee, or SASC, filed its 2025 Defense Policy Bill with the US Senate. It called for the US Secretary of Defense to provide a briefing to the Congressional Defense Committees looking into the US Air Force's use of the FrankenSAM, or at least the overarching concept behind it, no later than March 31, 2025. The SASC document presented before the Senate shed some light on what previously were murky details about how and why the FrankenSAM systems came to be developed in the first place. They were conceived in late 2022, early 23, as a solution to Ukraine's urgent requirement for more robust ground-based air defense capabilities to deal with the constant aerial bombardment by Russian crewed aircraft, drones, and cruise missiles. These attacks had intensified and spread to energy and other critical infrastructure in response to Ukraine's bombing of the Kerch Bridge that links the Crimean Peninsula to the Russian mainland on October 8, 2022, making the need for improved air defense systems even more critical. But there were two big problems in helping the Ukrainians. Although the US and fellow NATO allies like the UK and Germany had stockpiles of the air defense missiles that Ukraine needed ready to go, the Ukrainians couldn't use them. That's because the SAMs used by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, or UAF, such as the Buk M1 and S-300P, were all Russian-made from the Soviet era. The launchers for those systems simply weren't able to handle modern Western missiles. The Ukrainians needed launchers along with the missiles, but US-made SAM air defense launchers weren't anywhere near as abundant as the missiles they fire. For example, the US only has around 60 Patriot systems in total itself. The full systems are not quick or cheap to make, costing about $1 billion each, so there are only so many that can be sent to Ukraine, and that number is not enough to cover what they need. That left Ukrainian officials asking their allies for help in finding appropriate missiles for the 60 Soviet Buk missile launchers lying idle in the arsenal because they were running low. But realizing that it would be difficult for the West to obtain Russian-made ammunition, they came up with the idea of converting the launchers to use NATO-caliber anti-aircraft missiles instead and offered to start building them. Around 8 months later, in October 2023, the first FrankenSAM successfully arrived in Ukraine, a unique hybrid air defense system combining Western missiles and other components with Soviet-era missile launchers. Today, according to Alexander Kamshin, the head of the Ukrainian Ministry of Strategic Industries, there are about 5 such projects already deployed to the battlefield. But so far, only 3 hybrid weapons that are the fruits of the joint Ukrainian-US program developing FrankenSAMs domestically in Ukraine have been seen in action. Kamshin may have been referring to the British Supercat ASRAM hybrid system that's been specially adapted for Ukraine and spotted in the wild, or the exciting new FrankenTank concept recently announced by Rheinmetall from Germany. We'll come back to those later, but first, what are the 3 Ukrainian-US-made FrankenSAMs that the US Air Force is so adamant about implementing? Interestingly, the SASC's Senate document refers to systems on trucks or stationary pallets. This is an intriguing detail, as there have been no reports of Ukraine using such FrankenSAM configurations. The only known truck-mounted air defense system provided to Ukraine is the British Supercat ASRAM system, which features an AIM-132 ASRAM missile launcher mounted on a 6x6 Supercat all-terrain truck chassis, with a twin-rail launcher for a pair of missiles mounted at the rear. The 3 FrankenSAM systems currently in use are 1. Soviet Buk-SAM systems adapted to fire RIM-7 missiles, 2. A Soviet radar system modified to guide AIM-9M missiles, and 3. A hybrid system combining launchers and missiles from the Patriot air defense system with Soviet-made S-300 radars. While there are no publicly available figures as to how many of each of these systems are active on the battlefield, it seems a safe bet that the first of the 3 systems, the modified Buk, is the most widely deployed. Back in October 2023, Ukrainian MP Oleksandra Ustinova told journalists that it had taken a month for US specialists to modify 5 Buks, with 17 more pending. If they've kept up that rate of production, it's possible all 60 of Ukraine's Buk stockpile could have been converted into FrankenSAMs by now. This system is, in essence, a Buk M1 or 9A310 launcher modified to use RIM-7 Sea Sparrow missiles, instead of the standard 9M38 missiles for which it was designed. Although no match for modern Western equivalents, the Buk, also known as the SA-11 Gadfly, is still a sturdy piece of gear that was a stalwart of the Soviet army in the years before the USSR's collapse in 1991. It's 30.5 feet long, weighs 32.4 tons, and has a speed of 40 miles per hour. It carries a crew of 4, and in its original configuration also carried 4 9M38M1 missiles. Ukraine's stockpile of these missiles has understandably been depleted to a large extent, which is why their Buks needed to be converted to handle Western missiles like the Sea Sparrow instead. The RIM-7 Sea Sparrow is a SAM developed by Raytheon and General Dynamics for the United States Navy. It's a ship-launched variant of the AIM-7 Sparrow air-to-air missile, designed for point defense against anti-ship missiles, aircraft, and low-flying cruise missiles. It was first developed in 1976 and goes for around $165,000 each today. It features radar-guided, semi-automatic homing, a rather destructive annular blast fragmentation warhead, and a dual-thrust rocket motor for improved range and maneuverability. With ongoing upgrades and improvements to better deal with UAVs and sea-skimming targets, it's a missile that's stood the test of time. And the US has warehouses full of them. Because it's essentially a sea missile adapted into a SAM, there are a few trade-offs in using the RIM-7 instead of the 9M38M1 on a Buk. The engagement range will be 12.5 miles with an altitude ceiling of 9.3 miles, as opposed to around 18.5 miles for the Buk-launched 9M38M1. But the RIM-7 is 3 times lighter, 507 pounds versus 1,521 pounds, 6.5 feet shorter and half as wide. This means you can load more missiles on a single launcher, and they're likely to be more accurate, albeit at the cost of roughly a third of the range. The modification of the Buk to handle RIM-7s was simplified somewhat by the fact that both the RIM-7 and the 9M38 use semi-active laser guidance. So the main challenge was really to make the missiles see the target designation provided by the Buk's 9S35 radar as if it was a Mark 115, Mark 95, or Mark 23 radar. It's not clear whether the standard radar was modified or replaced entirely with a US system in this FrankenSAM. But either way, clearly it works. The second type of FrankenSAM, a Soviet radar system modified to guide AIM-9M Sidewinder missiles, might be even easier to adapt, according to some experts. That's because the AIM-9M doesn't need target illumination, instead relying on its own homing head. All the system operator has to do is show the target, program the homing head, let the missile lock on, and press launch. What's more, either a modern optical aiming station or even an ordinary sight is sufficient for launching an AIM-9M. The AIM-9M also offers flexibility in the type of chassis on which the launchers can be mounted, because the dimensions of the missiles are quite moderate. It weighs about 187 pounds, is under 10 feet long, 5 inches in diameter, and has a wingspan of 11 inches. The AIM-9M, AIM being short for Air Intercept Missile, is a supersonic, short-range, air-to-air variant of the AIM-9 Sidewinder family, developed by Raytheon since the 1980s. It features improved IRCCM, which stands for Infrared Countermeasures, and a digital ignition safety device. It also has high off-bore sight capabilities, allowing the missile to track targets at high seeker gimbal angles or highly distant from its bore sight. Although it's essentially an air-to-air missile rather than a SAM, it's been used in a SAM system before, namely in the MIM-72 Chaparral. This obsolete US-developed SAM was able to use fine-tuned AIM-9D missiles to destroy targets within a 3-mile range, at an altitude up to 2.5 miles. There's unfortunately not much information available on how the AIM-9M integrates with Soviet radar systems. However, in addition to its adaptability, another compelling reason to use the AIM-9M is that since it's largely been replaced by the more advanced AIM-9X by the US Armed Forces, there are significant quantities spread around warehouses throughout the US and its allied nations that can be quickly and easily made available to Ukraine. That brings us to the third variety of FrankenSAM, which is also the most powerful and secretive, the FrankenSAM with Patriot missiles. Patriot stands for Phased Array Tracking Radar for Intercept on Target. Because there are very few details publicly available about this system, we can only speculate as to which radar system and chassis have been merged with Patriot components. There are 3 likely candidates: the Buk M1, the Soviet-made S-300, and a modern, fully digital Ukrainian system like the ATK-6 KS-1 Phoenix. All Patriot missiles, both the GEM-T, which is deployed against aerodynamic targets, and the CRI-MSC anti-missile interceptors, require radio command guidance in the initial stage of the engagement, which is provided by the AN/MPQ-53, AN/MPQ-65, or the newer LTA-MDS radar. It's these radar components of the Patriot system that are the rarest, most expensive, take the longest to make, and are therefore most problematic to ship to Ukraine. While it's unknown which Soviet or Ukrainian radar has been modified to be able to launch Patriot missiles, one thing is for sure: transfer of only the launchers, loaders, and a few support vehicles without the core AN/MPQ-53 or AN/MPQ-65 radars is bound to be easier, faster, and much more cost-effective. This holds true whether the FrankenSAM Patriot is used in Ukraine or to defend airfields and infrastructure on the US mainland, as envisioned by the SASC. Raytheon's MIM-104 Patriot missile is of course a much more powerful projectile than either the RIM-7 Sea Sparrow or AIM-9M Sidewinder used in the other FrankenSAM varieties. For one, it's an actual SAM system designed to detect, track, and engage a wide range of aerial targets, including aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. Each system consists of a mobile launching station, a radar unit, and a control center, with each launching station carrying up to 4 missiles. The system can be easily transported and redeployed and uses advanced phased array radar, which provides 360-degree coverage and can detect targets at long ranges. Patriot missiles have a range of 43.5 miles, an altitude of 79,000 to 98,000 feet, a speed of up to Mach 3.5, and cost a cool $1 to $6 million per missile, depending on the variant and configuration. Although they're the most powerful of the SAM missiles incorporated into FrankenSAMs that we know about, they're also not the kind of missiles you want to be indiscriminately firing to shoot down Gerund-2 drones, otherwise known as flying lawnmowers, which cost 50 times less at minimum. Unfortunately, other than a few official and unofficial videos and pictures of them, that's just about all that's actually known for sure about the FrankenSAM project. Publicly known for sure, that is. Although no details are provided in their document presented to the Senate, the SASC must have assessed the Ukrainians' experience of using the FrankenSAM in combat favorably to come to the conclusion that the US Air Force should look seriously at adapting it for its own use, specifically for air-based defense. But why would the US Air Force, or indeed the Department of Defense as a whole, need hybrid SAM systems to defend its air bases, especially back home, ingenious as the FrankenSAM may be? Aren't they protected by the world's biggest arsenal of the world's most sophisticated weapon systems already? Well, yes and no. Things change, and sometimes they change fast. The committee recognizes that the standard budget and acquisition process of the Department of Defense, or DoD for short, does not allow for agile development and rapid procurement of innovative technological solutions designed to solve real-world strategies, the SASC contends. However, today's continually evolving threats require the DoD to adapt and allow for creative and agile responses to emergent problems. If you think about how rapidly warfare has evolved in just the last couple of years with UAVs, electronic warfare, maritime drones, hypersonic missiles, and surveillance becoming decisive factors on the battlefield, you can see where they're coming from. And that's where FrankenSAM comes in, they say. The core of FrankenSAM leverages easy-to-use, proven technologies that limit the dependence on component development timelines, while emphasizing integration of existing and new equipment into an open architecture system. The modular approach of the system can be quickly integrated into existing air defense systems where gaps may occur in protecting installations, or providing quick reaction, standalone point defense where a larger comprehensive air defense system may not exist. FrankenSAM could allow the DoD to kill two birds with one stone. Firstly, the US has stockpiles of perfectly good and deadly missiles and related equipment that are more or less lying redundant because they've been replaced by upgraded models. These are, in many cases, the models currently being produced for both use by the US and its allies, who have also upgraded their systems. By repurposing this stock of older missiles, launchers, and other components for use in hybrid systems like the FrankenSAM, a large, readily available arsenal that's already bought and paid for is created. That seems like a very effective way to address one of the few known weaknesses in US defense, which is in the area of short-range air defense, or SHORAD. This weakness in air defense has arisen precisely because warfare has evolved so fast, especially in the air. The US military's footprint both at home and around the world is so huge that it hasn't quite had time to catch up everywhere yet. There are holes. FrankenSAM offers an easy fix, both to plug the short-term holes and to provide an agile, rapidly deployable, mobile air defense solution for use almost anywhere. So where are the holes and how can FrankenSAM plug them? Thomas Newdick sums it up well in his comprehensive article for the Warzone. It's no secret that the US military in general has a SHORAD's deficit. Limited numbers of ground-based air defenses also extend to the supplies of longer-range systems like the Patriot, and there's no mid-tier system fielded by the US military in significant numbers. The realities of future conflicts likely being fought in non-permissive aerial environments have forced a shift in thinking, and with SHORADs being needed sooner rather than later, a semi-off-the-shelf solution like a FrankenSAM system is obviously of interest. Air bases are particularly vulnerable, he says, especially those far from home, and in increasingly contested environments. The threats from any combination of low-flying fighter aircraft, helicopters, cruise missiles, and drones that might be employed by China, for example, against an airfield used by the US Air Force in the Pacific will be complex and varied. The ability to protect against cruise missiles and drones that might have penetrated the outer layers of the air defenses and directly threaten the airbase and the critical assets that it hosts could well make the difference between victory and defeat. Very small units that are far forward deployed in less conspicuous areas and those farther back will also need some form of protection against lower volume aerial threats. Sure, at an airbase you might expect there to be crewed fighters to tackle incoming drone and missile threats, but in the event of a large conflict, they're likely to be needed everywhere, making it all the more important that airfields are defended by dedicated SHORADs. At the same time, inside the US itself, air bases and much other critical infrastructure have been shown to be potentially vulnerable, particularly to drone attacks. The country is so big and drone technology is so pervasive that it's hard to keep up with the vulnerabilities, let alone patch them. For these reasons, it's not hard to see why the configurable and highly mobile FrankenSAM is of such interest to the US military. They should be fairly easy to transport by air, so can simply be assembled and flown into the bases where they're needed, even on very short notice. Once in theater, they'd be able to move quickly to new locations, making them unpredictable and harder to target, an important factor when faced with long-range drone and cruise missile attacks. They could even be installed as platforms in semi-permanent locations or at sea aboard support vessels and sea bases. Meanwhile, perhaps inspired by the FrankenSAM, Ukraine will soon be receiving a different flavor of reconstituted SHORAD in the form of Rheinmetall's Frankenstein air defense tank. That's the German innovation hinted at earlier in the video. The Frankenstein air defense tank consists of an advanced German Skyranger anti-aircraft gun mounted on a Leopard 1 battle tank. The Skyranger 30 is a mobile system capable of engaging fixed and rotary wing aircraft, Group 1 and 2 unmanned aerial systems, loitering munitions, and cruise missiles. With a weight of around 2 to 2.5 tons, it can be installed on lighter 6x6 wheeled vehicles and operated both autonomously and in networked operations. It's fitted with a modified version of the Oerlikon KCA 1.28-inch gun. It has an effective range of 1.86 miles, a rate of fire of 1,200 rounds per minute, and the ability to elevate 85 degrees to combat terminal diving targets. The total payload of 7 ounces is time-programmed upon leaving the muzzle to open up in front of a target to form a lethal cone. To detect targets, the Skyranger 30 uses the S-band AESA multi-mission radar (AMMR) developed by Rheinmetall Italia, with 5 flat antennas integrated around the turret, providing full 360-degree coverage. For passive detection, it's installed with Rheinmetall's first fast infrared search and track, which is optimized to detect pop-up targets such as helicopters. Identification and tracking are handled by a compact target tracker that includes an HD-cooled MWIR thermal camera, 1 Full HD TV camera, and 2 laser rangefinders, one devoted to air targets and the other to land targets. Additional features include 2 ROSI, or Rapid Obscuring System launchers, each with 9 multispectral smoke grenades, a hatch in the hull ceiling to view the battlefield from outside, and a coaxial machine gun fitted on the left of the main gun for use as a self-defense weapon. It's an impressive-sounding system, and one likely to be welcomed by Ukraine with open arms, and the sooner they receive them, the better. It's also probable that the German DoD, like its American counterparts, is also eyeing the holes in its own SHORAD systems and evaluating how the Frankenstein air defense tank and other ways of creatively reconstituting its arsenal might be put to use plugging those holes. But with the US and its allies like Germany increasingly drawn into conflicts around the world, from Ukraine to Israel and the Red Sea to the South China Sea, Newdick says, time may be fast running out to procure and field such systems. As for the FrankenSAMs, wouldn't it be fitting if a system developed under a crash program to provide a rapid and inexpensive solution for Ukraine ends up becoming a long-term critical part of US air defense and beyond?
It's the dead of night. You're crouched in the trenches when you hear it. That low, menacing buzz gets closer. Baba Yaga! Someone whispers under their breath, dread spreading like wildfire. You look up and something drops, but it isn't a bomb. A metallic object hits the ground with a clatter, and a pair of cold, mechanical eyes lock onto you. It's a robot dog. The drone vanishes, but the dog is there to hunt. Nope, this isn't a scene pulled straight out of a dystopian horror film. This is the new phase of warfare. The very real scenario many Russian soldiers will face, or already do, as the Ukrainian forces get increasingly creative with their use of autonomous weapons in the Russo-Ukrainian war. But how did a vampire and a robot dog transition from a punchline to a really bizarre joke to a reality in modern warfare? Keep watching to uncover the surprising connection between these two elements and how this peculiar pairing is transforming the battlefield in unexpected ways. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Given that the Ukrainian vampire drones and robot dogs are a culmination of the use of autonomous systems in the Russo-Ukrainian war, we must first explore the broader context of these technologies and their strategic implications. You see, since the very beginning of the invasion in 2022, Ukraine has been seeking to minimize the risks to humans on the battlefield while maximizing operational effectiveness. This approach stands in stark contrast to its Russian adversaries, who've shown nothing but a willingness to expend lives in pursuit of territorial gains. The 667,630 Russian troops lost between February 24, 2022 and October 10, 2024 speaks volumes about this meat-grinder military strategy that sees soldiers as mere cannon fodder. Ukraine, seeing its forces as valuable assets and, above all, humans, has prioritized innovative tactics and technologies for any scenarios where human lives might be at stake. This involves navigating areas littered with landmines, conducting reconnaissance in an enemy-controlled territory, and attempting to breach fortified positions that contain enemy troops. The solution for all these dangerous scenarios? Autonomous systems. By leveraging advanced technologies like drones and robot vehicles, Ukraine is not only enhancing its operational capabilities, but also protecting its soldiers from unnecessary risks. However, autonomous systems aren't only about combat and surveillance. They also play a crucial role in logistics and support, streamlining supply chains and ensuring that troops receive the necessary resources without exposing them to danger. With these in mind, let's explore the most common autonomous systems used in the war in Ukraine, leading up to the puzzling vampire drones and robot dogs. Given that the war in Ukraine has been widely referred to as a drone war, there's really only one place to start: the drones. The term drone war isn't just a catchy label. It stems from the unprecedented scale of unmanned aerial vehicle (UAV) deployment, which has made the Russo-Ukrainian war synonymous with drones. According to US officials, Ukrainian forces are losing approximately 10,000 drones each month. That's 10,000. The number of losses alone should tell you all you need to know about the relentless pace of this aerial battle. Drones have become integral to tracking enemy forces, guiding artillery, and executing strikes, thus marking a historic shift in military tactics and technology. Though many experts have attributed this shift to the war in Ukraine specifically, it's important to note that UAVs have also seen extensive use in other global conflicts, demonstrating their growing relevance on the modern battlefield. They were used in Vietnam, Kosovo, and Iraq, as well as in the recent Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh. However, the concept of unmanned aerial weapons in military applications can be traced even further back, from Chinese fire kites in ancient times to balloon bombs during the Austrian siege of Venice in 1849. The idea of using unmanned aerial technology to gain a strategic advantage has a long and fascinating history. However, the scale of drone utilization in Ukraine is unlike anything we've witnessed before. This begs a simple question: why? Why are drones so extensively used in Ukraine? The answer is simple: they're the most practical and cost-effective solution. You see, conventional warplanes are far less effective in Ukraine due to the saturation of anti-aircraft systems near the front lines. In contrast, these unmanned vehicles, which cost a mere $500 or even less, can be deployed in overwhelming numbers without significantly straining military budgets and worrying about pilot safety. Also, the very nature of the conflict in Ukraine makes drones an ideal solution. The situation on the battlefield is best summed up in 3 words: chaotic, dynamic, and highly contested. That's why the Ukrainian forces need a solution that can adapt quickly. And that's precisely what drones do. They can be launched, retasked, and retrieved in a matter of minutes, allowing for a rapid response to shifting frontline scenarios. Due to their audacious roles, these drones are often viewed as expendable. That's why many of the drones used by Ukrainian forces today are often adapted from commercial technology. These less expensive, smaller, and more agile drones include the first-person view (FPV) drones, which have gained notoriety for their effectiveness, especially in relation to their price tag. Originally designed for racing or recreational use, FPV drones are now being retrofitted with explosives for precision strikes, carrying out single-use attacks with remarkable accuracy while evading detection by Russian air defenses. However, there are also some tech heavyweights in drone technology employed by both sides. Take the Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drones as an example. These UAVs are widely believed to be among the best drones in the world. They can fly at altitudes of up to 22,000 feet, operate for over 20 hours, and carry up to 320 pounds of payload. Since the beginning of the invasion, Ukraine has received over 50 of these high-tech UAVs, including over 50 drones from Turkey delivered from March 2022 onward, one from Lithuania in July 2022 and one from Poland in late 2022. However, as precious as these drones are in combat, they also cost about $5 million apiece, which is why Ukraine turned to more affordable alternatives. But even though these FPV drones might be less sophisticated, their operation still requires coordination and precision. The Ukrainian soldiers usually employ a remote controller to operate the drone while wearing a headset to view the drone's camera feed. Another operator may use a tablet to provide situational awareness. Once the target is spotted, operators focus on its most vulnerable points, such as an open hatch or engine compartment on a tank, before directing the drone for a strike. Besides armored vehicles, the Ukrainian forces have used FPV drones to target supply depots and command posts, capitalizing on their ability to dive directly into vulnerable points. Of course, direct strikes represent only one of the common uses of FPV drones. These devices have also been used for surveillance and reconnaissance. This is made possible by the photo and video sensors these drones are equipped with, enabling them to conduct real-time intelligence gathering. That's why they're often used to locate enemy bases and observe troop movements, providing critical intelligence that informs further tactical decisions. FPV drones have also been used to direct artillery strikes in the war. This also goes back to the real-time video feed, which enables artillery units to adjust their fire with precision, ensuring maximum effectiveness against enemy positions. This capability was particularly crucial during the early stages of the war, where coordinating artillery strikes helped Ukraine repel advances by Russian forces. Of course, we can't forget about another crucial role of drones in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict: propaganda and documentation. Given the sheer scale of war crimes committed by the Russian forces, the Ukrainian military and humanitarian organizations needed a way to document and verify these atrocities in real time. Leveraging drones to capture high-resolution footage of the devastation caused by Russian attacks helped them do just that. So the FPV drones have helped Ukraine document horrifying scenes, such as the bombing of civilian areas, the destruction of infrastructure, and the aftermath of missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. The footage captured is often used for propaganda purposes, contrasting the destruction sowed by the Russian forces with the resilience displayed by their Ukrainian counterparts. This not only boosts morale at home, but also aids in garnering much-needed international support. The many uses of UAVs can be directly tied to many models of FPV drones in Ukraine. From drones that can fit in the palm of your hand to larger models weighing over 1,000 pounds, Ukraine has built or acquired a diverse fleet of remotely piloted aircraft that can severely complicate and frustrate Russia's advances. However, few drones used by Ukrainian forces seem to frustrate their Russian foes as much as the Vampire drones. For Russians, the Vampires are more than just drones. They're the unseen terror of the night, the part of the day when the battlefield in Ukraine changes. In the day, Ukraine's FPV drones swarm the skies, but by nightfall, the Vampires come out to hunt. The Russians are so terrified of these drones, they've nicknamed them Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga is a Slavic witch from folklore, something like the American boogeyman, but darker, more elusive. She's the monster mothers tell their children about to keep them from wandering into the woods. As for Russian soldiers, Baba Yaga has become more than just a story. The Vampire drones, as terrifying as any myth, are behind this. And the fear of them is real. Russian soldiers speak of them in hushed tones, with intercepted radio communications revealing a chilling desperation. The Russian commanders have even placed bounties on these drones, $500 or a week-long vacation for anyone who can take one down. But they rarely do. And that's not because these drones have claws and the ability to abduct soldiers, as the Chechen troops of the Russian armed forces have claimed. It's due to their impressive capabilities. With this in mind, let's finally meet these fabled Vampire drones. The Vampire drones are 6-rotor hexacopters, specifically designed for heavy payloads and night operations. Equipped with advanced thermal imaging cameras, they practically own the night, undetectable to the naked eye. At roughly 1,300 feet in the air, they see everything, but the Russians, they barely see them coming. However, they do typically hear them, as the Baba Yaga is reportedly quite loud, but the incoming sound only heightens the tension for the Russian troops, because they know they're being hunted, and they know what's coming. Each Vampire can carry up to 33 pounds of payload. That's more than enough to deliver a thermobaric warhead or a high-explosive fragmentation bomb to its target. From anti-tank mines to shape-charge munitions, these drones can pack some serious firepower. It's like sending in a stealth bomber, but for just $10,000 a pop. Cheap, deadly, and devastatingly accurate. The last characteristic is especially important in the war in Ukraine. After all, the country can't afford to waste any precious rounds, which often happens with artillery. But the Vampire drones, they don't miss. They almost always hit their mark. This makes them quite an economic killer, saving Ukraine's limited ammunition, one devastating strike at a time. Another characteristic that must be added to the Vampire's long list of impressive features is its remarkable range. For such an affordable weapon, it boasts a combat radius of 5 to 7.5 miles, meaning that a single Vampire can launch devastating strikes from a safe distance, keeping its operators out of harm's way while wreaking havoc on enemy positions. This range is crucial on the fluid battlefield of Ukraine, where front lines shift rapidly and staying out of sight is a matter of survival. It allows the Ukrainian forces to maintain the element of surprise, launching unexpected attacks that can leave Russian units scrambling. These attacks can come from altitudes of up to 1,300 feet, making the Vampire drones a formidable threat. Sometimes this threat is the last to come, as smaller reconnaissance drones are sent to scout for targets before the Baba Yaga swoops in for the kill. But what exactly are the Vampire drones targeting? Well, their mission scope extends beyond the front lines. These drones strike not only at Ukrainian enemies within the country, but also targets within Russia itself. For instance, Ukrainian operators actively focus on Russian mortars that pose a threat to their infantry. A single successful strike on these critical artillery pieces can render them ineffective for days, significantly impacting the enemy's firepower. Often the mission even involves dropping multiple bombs on these mortars to neutralize them altogether and prevent them from contributing to the ongoing conflict. In addition to mortars, Vampire drones have gained a reputation for their effectiveness against tanks, particularly during night operations. Operating primarily at night, the Vampire drones utilize advanced thermal imaging technology, granting them a significant tactical advantage. This enables them to operate undetected while successfully locating Russian forces. They can deliver mortar-sized munitions directly onto armored vehicles, capitalizing on their stealth capabilities. This not only disrupts the enemy's armor, but also forces Russian units to reconsider their deployment strategies. The Vampires also play a vital role in logistical support by transporting essential supplies like food and water to frontline troops. In many instances, they conduct as many as 5 to 6 deliveries a day, ensuring that soldiers in remote or dangerous areas receive the nourishment they need to maintain their combat effectiveness. And that's not even all. The Vampires can also function as a mothership, equipped with signal repeaters and anti-jamming equipment. This capability extends the operational range and battery life of secondary drones, enhancing their overall effectiveness on the battlefield. Finally, by providing air support to the Ukrainian troops, the Vampire allows infantry units to remain safer while effectively targeting enemy positions from above. This aerial support is vital for maintaining defensive lines against Russian advances, and it exemplifies how modern warfare blends technology with tactical ingenuity. In this high-stakes game of cat and mouse, the Vampire drones stand out as multifaceted tools in Ukraine's arsenal, flying often and striking hard. However, it's also important to note that the hexacopter we've been describing is only one of 3 Vampire weapons used by the Ukrainian armed forces. This attack drone was developed by the Ukrainian company Skyfall, and it reportedly originates from an agricultural octocopter. Next is the American Vampire anti-aircraft and land attack missile system, capable of guiding advanced precision kill weapon system rockets using a laser beam. This relatively new system was part of the military assistance package worth nearly $3 billion, which was announced in August 2022. Finally, there's the Czech RM-70 Vampir multiple rocket launcher. An upgraded version of the BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system, the RM-70 Vampir is designed for rapid reloading in the field, allowing the Ukrainian forces to sustain their firepower during combat operations without being tethered to a logistics chain. With all these Vampires lurking around, the Ukrainian battlefield is no longer just a war zone, it's a full-blown horror show for the Russians. And the last thing they needed to make their nightmare even worse was the arrival of robot dogs. Yet that's precisely what's happening in Ukraine. And how do we know? 2 words: social media. The robot dogs officially entered the game in August 2024, when the Telegram channel of the Ukrainian 28th Mechanized Brigade posted a video of a robot dog patrolling a heavily damaged town. The video described the robot dog as having a multitude of talents and a wide potential for use on the battlefield, and added that these 4-legged robotic friends are poised to influence the course of hostilities, just as drones once changed the war. In a post later published to X, formerly Twitter, by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the commander of the same unit, the 28th Mechanized Brigade, said that every unit should own such a dog. A Ukrainian operator then demonstrated the capabilities of these robot dogs at an undisclosed location in Ukraine. The robot dog was even shown accompanying a Ukrainian soldier of the Khortytsia unit, with the soldier relying on the robot's thermal imaging camera for surveillance in a wooded area. However, it was roughly a month later that the robot dogs first came into contact with the Vampire drones, well, at least publicly. In late September, Ukraine News Live shared a video on X showing a drone dropping a robot dog, referred to as a combat robot scout, in a field before the dog rose to its feet and started walking. As of August 2024, there are reportedly over 30 robot dogs roaming somewhere on the Ukrainian front lines. Their presence undoubtedly marks a pivotal advancement in modern warfare, blending cutting-edge technology with tactical operations. As these robotic companions join the fight, the Russians are facing a new kind of adversary, one that walks, scans, and strategizes, and yet doesn't fire, doesn't need rations, and certainly doesn't get demoralized. But let's back up for a second. Just as the Vampire drone wasn't the first or the only drone the Ukrainian forces used in the conflict, this intriguing robot dog is part of a broader trend of introducing robotics on the battlefield. Let's do a brief overview of the robotic platforms used in Ukraine before discussing these new and advanced 4-legged companions. At the forefront of this robotic revolution are the combat robots designed for fierce engagements on the front lines. These machines are engineered for remote combat operations, so they can conduct assaults, defend positions, and perform surveillance, all while their operators remain safely sheltered up to 2.5 miles away. Equipped with a range of weaponry, including the 7.62mm PKT and PKM machine guns, and the 12.7mm NSVT and M2 Browning machine guns, these robots can pack quite a punch. Notably, some models are fortified against small arms fire and come with thermographic cameras for nighttime engagements. The models in this category include the Shablia M2, the Lyat, the Moroz, and the D11. The versatile D2111 can also swiftly transition from a combat platform to a transport system, enabling rapid response in any frontline situation. This robust array of combat robots exemplifies how Ukraine has embraced technology to enhance its offensive military capabilities. However, the integration of robotics doesn't stop there. The evolution continues with the self-destructive robots and mine layers, which serve a critical role in neutralizing enemy armored vehicles. These robots can carry up to 2 TM62 anti-tank mines, or a payload of up to 88 pounds, moving at speeds of up to 15 miles per hour while being operated remotely from distances of up to 3.4 miles away. Noteworthy models include the Rattle S, the Arc-1, and the PD-15 Foxy, all designed to wreak havoc on Russian positions and logistical routes with mines. Finally, we have the logistical robots, which are the backbone of supply and evacuation efforts on the front lines. These versatile machines can transport provisions, ammunition, and equipment as well as evacuate wounded soldiers. With a carrying capacity of up to 1,300 pounds and an operational range of 25 miles, these robots are nothing short of lifesavers for Ukrainian troops. They also come in tracked models for increased cross-country abilities and wheeled designs for an even speedier delivery. Significant models in this category include the Volaya E, the Rattle H, the Rice Pro, the KNLR-E, and the Sierco S1. The robot dogs we're focusing on in this video belong to a separate category: surveillance and reconnaissance. Unlike traditional drones that soar above the fray, these four-legged technological marvels navigate challenging terrains, moving through dense forests, inside buildings, and along narrow trenches. Their ability to traverse obstacles and remain stable on uneven ground allows them to reach areas that are often too dangerous for human soldiers. The specific tasks these robotic dogs undertake include exploration of hazardous environments. They scout ahead of troops, locating enemy positions and identifying threats such as mines or booby traps. In a sense, they serve as scouts, laying the groundwork for human soldiers to follow safely. Surveillance operations. Equipped with advanced cameras and sensors, these robots gather critical intelligence, transmitting real-time video feeds back to commanders. Thanks to their small size, they can operate stealthily, often camouflaged to blend into their surroundings. Logistical support. While primarily used for reconnaissance, the robot dogs can also carry payloads of up to 9 pounds, enabling them to deliver ammunition, medical supplies, or explosives to the frontline troops. This logistical support minimizes the risk to human lives while ensuring that the soldiers have the necessary resources, a goal many of the autonomous systems we've mentioned seek to accomplish. Data security. In a tactical environment where information is vital, these robots can erase sensitive data immediately if they're captured, ensuring that the Russian forces can't exploit any intelligence they might gain. These smart dogs currently deployed in Ukraine are predominantly used by the 28th Mechanized Brigade, particularly the unit known as Medoid, which translates to honey badger. However, this isn't the first time robot dogs have been used or showcased. In fact, prior to their use in Ukraine, several countries were experimenting with robotic dog technology. Unsurprisingly, the US has been at the forefront of developing and deploying this technology. Initially, the Big Dog, developed by Boston Dynamics in 2005, was envisioned as a robotic pack mule for US troops. Though it was ultimately discontinued due to its noise issues, it laid the groundwork for future developments. Spot, a smaller, quieter robot dog, emerged in 2015, primarily for reconnaissance and security tasks. It's been used in various roles, including supporting military bases and identifying hazardous situations. China has also been making strides in this technology, but their dogs came with a twist. They're armed with various weapon systems. In recent years, the People's Liberation Army has been aggressively pursuing the integration of robotic technologies into the military, signaling a potential arms race in robotic warfare. And where there's a military race, there's Russia. At a 2022 Weapons Expo, Russia fitted a Chinese unitary robotics dog with an RPG-26 rocket launcher, attempting to demonstrate the military potential of even commercially available robots. Interestingly, the price of this robot was hiked to over $16,000, roughly 4 times its actual cost. Apparently, they determined that if they can't innovate, they might as well inflate. However, Chinese unitary robotics is important for this video for another reason. You see, according to Forbes, the robotic dogs used in Ukraine closely resemble those developed by this Chinese company. The Unitree Go 2 Pro, identified as the legged equivalent of the Chinese-made DJI quadcopters, is both efficient and easily available at a low cost. Priced between $2,800 to $3,000, it features a top speed of 11 miles per hour, weighs under 30 pounds, and has an intelligent control system equipped with multiple fisheye cameras. Its powerful 1.5 teraflop processor and smart software allow it to maintain stability on uneven surfaces and even follow operators visually. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, it might be just a coincidence, as the German newspaper Bild claims that the Ukrainian robot dogs were developed and sent by British risk management company and drone manufacturer Brit Alliance. The company's managing director, Kyle Thorburn, stated that these machines were born due to repeated concerns about the increasingly frequent reports of losses on the front line by enemy drones. Essentially, this makes the robot dogs a safer solution for reconnaissance missions in high-risk zones. But here's where the mystery lies. When Brit Alliance was later contacted for clarification, the company revealed that the specific robots shown in footage from Ukraine aren't manufactured by their company. Brit Alliance only confirmed they, in fact, supplied modified robot dogs to the military without specifying if this includes the Ukrainian military or disclosing the original manufacturer, so make of that what you will. But regardless of who the manufacturer is, the only thing that matters is that Ukraine is putting these robots to work on the battlefield, blending innovation with determination. From what we know about these robots, they boast quite impressive specifications and features that enhance their effectiveness on the battlefield. Capable of running at speeds of up to 9 miles per hour, these robotic companions can swiftly maneuver through various terrains, providing tactical advantages in rapidly changing combat scenarios. With a battery life of up to 5 hours, they can sustain operations for extended periods without the need for recharging, allowing them to cover significant ground and gather intelligence. But what truly sets them apart is their remarkable stealth capability. These dogs carry a heat signature similar to that of a rabbit, making detection by Russian unmanned aerial vehicles considerably more challenging. Further enhancing their concealment, the robots can be draped in camouflage blankets made by German suppliers Concamo, allowing them to blend seamlessly into their surroundings. When stationary, they effectively merge with the background vegetation, becoming nearly invisible to both visual observation and thermal imaging. And the best part, the cost of these advanced machines ranges from $4,400 to $8,800, making them a relatively affordable asset in modern warfare. When it comes to deploying these advanced robots, the operation is both sophisticated and intuitive. They can be controlled remotely, with operators using a handheld device or a computer interface to direct their movements. The robots feature advanced FPV cameras, enabling their operators to see from the robot's perspective in real time. When deployed, the robotic dogs can scout areas and relay video feeds back to commanders, providing crucial intelligence about enemy positions and terrain. Thanks to this data-driven approach, the Ukrainian troops have substantially better situational awareness, while their leaders can make informed decisions on the battlefield. If necessary, these mechanic dogs can also operate fully autonomously. How so? By following predefined routes or tracking operators. One look at all these features is enough to understand why robot dogs are so significant to the Ukrainian military. They can cover ground that would be difficult for traditional surveillance methods and transport supplies to contested areas, all the while reducing the risk to human lives. But there's one more significant aspect of these robots worth mentioning: the sheer psychological terror. Similarly to their transportation systems, the vampire drones, the presence of robotic dogs on the battlefield instills fear and uncertainty in Russian forces. After all, the Russian troops have barely been able to deal with the relentless onslaught of Ukrainian drones. Now they've got four-legged nightmares dropping from the sky to contend with, and these robots aren't just canvassing Ukrainian territory. No, these fearless robotic animals are venturing behind enemy lines, gathering intel and delivering supplies where human soldiers dare not tread. So good luck sleeping at night, comrades. Now it's time for you to chime in. What do you make of this bizarre duo of robotic dogs and vampire drones? Should we be excited about the dawn of a new era in military tactics, or should we be concerned about what these advanced technologies could do beyond the battlefield?
What's Russia's biggest nightmare in this war? Not tanks, not missiles, it's something far smaller, but far deadlier. The UJ-22 Kamikaze drone is wreaking havoc where it hurts most, slipping past defenses to strike Moscow, ammunition depots, and vital infrastructure. For the Kremlin, it's not just a weapon, it's a message. Nowhere is safe. But what makes this drone such a relentless threat, and why can't Russia stop it? The answers uncover a weapon so ingenious, it's reshaping the battlefield and forcing Putin to confront a nightmare he never saw coming. Now, Ukraine has used drones to attack targets in Moscow before, but on the night of November 10, 2024, it launched its largest such attack to date. The Russians announced that they had shot down at least 34 drones near Moscow. The attack injured several civilians and interrupted dozens of flights, but Moscow wasn't the only target. The Russian MOD said it intercepted 84 drones in total. The Ukrainian General Staff said the strikes included an ammunition dump in Bryansk, which is about 235 miles southwest of Moscow. This attack demonstrated Ukraine's ability to hit targets across a broad expanse of Russian territory with its drones. But the success of Ukraine's attack raises an interesting question. With Moscow being so important, why were any of Ukraine's drones successful in breaching its air defenses? Moscow has two layers for its air defense: the A-135M strategic missile defense system and the S-50M, which includes the S-300 PM2 and S-400 and the Pantsir self-propelled anti-aircraft weapon. But these layers of defense, with their powerful radars, are designed to target incoming missiles and aircraft. Ukraine's drones, in comparison, are challenging to detect by radar because of their smaller size, low speed, and materials they're manufactured from. Drones are often made of plastic, with only small metal engines powering some of the larger ones. These are not stealth drones per se, but their materials reduce their radar signatures. The Pantsir is ordinarily the system of choice against drones. Pantsir systems have destroyed more than 300 Ukrainian drones. However, detecting Ukrainian drones has also proven a challenge for it. The radar systems have to cut through the normal interferences they can expect in urban environments that can make drones difficult to distinguish from other phenomena. Russian systems have mistakenly targeted large flying birds. Russia also faces the problems Ukraine has faced when it dealt with Russian-purchased Shahid drones made by Iran. Using expensive missiles to shoot down cheap drones is not an effective use of resources in a war of attrition. This is why the Ukrainians have begun to make use of old-style flak cannons against the Shahid. Russia has also moved some of its air defense systems further south from Moscow to support efforts in the war. In January 2023, air defenses were installed on the roofs of buildings in the city, indicating a shortage. Because of the sanctions, the weapons sent to the front will be harder to replace. Ukraine naturally kept quiet about where it launched its drone attacks from, but it's possible that its agents in Russia used them against specific targets that they knew the location of beforehand. Ukraine has repeatedly demonstrated its ability to carry out sabotage attacks deep into enemy territory. A recent example came in late September when Ukraine's military intelligence agency, the GUR, damaged a minesweeper ship in the Baltic. Ukraine has proven itself a master at these tactics, and it's likely that its agents have been active using the smaller FPV drones it's employed to such great effect on the front lines. But when it comes to penetrating multi-layered air defense systems, it's necessary to have more than one option. Fortunately, the Ukrainians have many long-range drones they can use against targets deep within Russia from their own territory. With this in mind, the question about the recent Moscow attack is, who done it? We can begin with a domestic design called the UJ-22, called the Airborne. This drone resembles a miniature aircraft. One would be forgiven for thinking it has similarities with the planes in the skies of World War I. The UJ-22 is both a reconnaissance and an attack drone. For reconnaissance, it has a 64-megapixel camera that feeds its images back to its operators in real time. In attack mode, the drone can be armed with a warhead to make it a kamikaze device, or with up to 44 pounds of droppable unguided bombs. The type of bombs include up to 4 82mm mortar mines or 6 adapted rounds from the RPG-7. The Airborne can stay flying for up to 6 hours and has a range of 500 miles. It's 12 feet long and has a wingspan of 14 feet. Ukraine was using this drone from at least March 2022. On the 30th of that month, Russia's MOD published footage of the destruction of a UJ-22 via its Pantsir air defense system. The UJ-22 has also been attacking Moscow from at least February 2023, meaning that it could have taken part in the raid on November 10th. The Ukrainian drone crews aren't content to just show off their throwback designs though. There's another long-range drone in fashion among them. Meet the AQ-400 Scythe. It has tandem wings and a box-like fuselage. The range is shorter than the UJ-22, topping out at 465 miles, but it can deliver a higher payload of up to 70 pounds for a standard mission and 154 pounds if there's a target at shorter ranges that the Ukrainians want to see gone. A similar idea, though, with yet another design, comes in the form of the AN-196 Liati, Fierce. If you see this and think you're looking at a Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drone, you're not far off the mark. This drone can carry a payload of 50 kilograms. The Liati is one of the primary weapons of choice for a Ukrainian drone unit attached to the GUR that has a dedicated mission of targeting Russian territory. This unit hit an ammunition depot in Toropets between Moscow and St. Petersburg in September. The Ukrainians claim that this depot stored artillery shells, glide bombs, and Iskander missiles. The fires were visible for miles. Footage of the AN-196 being shot down on November 10th confirmed that this drone was used in the attack on Moscow, meaning that it has a range of about 375 miles at least. If you need to hit targets at really long range though, go for the UJ-26 Beaver. This drone can fly up to 620 miles with a payload capacity of 44 pounds. This drone was introduced in 2023 and entered mass production by December of that year. It can cruise at a top speed of 125 miles per hour. The Ukrainians have used the Beaver to attack Moscow on several occasions. Such incidents include a strike on high-rise buildings in the summer of 2023, and possibly even an attack on the Kremlin itself. The Beaver is essentially Ukraine's version of the Shahid 136, although it has a lower range. Speaking of the Shahid, it fell victim to another Ukrainian competitor this last spring. The A-22 Foxbat is another domestic design with a propeller. If you were thinking this one looks like a vintage propeller plane too, you'd be right, because the drone is probably a variant of Ukraine's Aeropract A-22 Foxbat Ultralight. This aircraft is normally designed for recreational flights, but the Ukrainians have adapted it to a remote-controlled UAV for very long-range missions. Perhaps that's recreation of a different sort for Ukraine's drone pilots. Compared to the Airborne, this one seems to be a specialized kamikaze weapon. If you're a Ukrainian commander, you'd prefer it if long range is what you really need. On April 2, 2024, this drone hit a factory in Yelabuga, Tatarstan, which reportedly manufactured Shahid-type drones. The hit occurred 870 miles behind the front lines, which means this guy is more than capable of hitting either Moscow or St. Petersburg. How do we know it was responsible for the attack on the Shahid factory? Well, because it was captured on video in good detail. Its profile stands out. But Ukraine has more tricks up its sleeve. What if the mission requires something faster? The Ukrainians might have been denied the ability to use traditional cruise missiles, but the solution? Turn a drone into a sort of cruise missile. Meet the UJ-25 Skyline. This is a jet-powered drone that was first confirmed on the battlefield in December 2023, when it crashed onto the roof of a house in the Russian-occupied city of Berdyansk. This one has a one-way ticket, as the UJ-25 is always a kamikaze drone. The UJ-25 is the evolution of the earlier UJ-23 Topaz. The manufacturer, Ukrajet, claims that the Topaz has a range of about 250 miles, a cruising speed of 370 miles per hour, and a top speed of 500 miles per hour. The Warzone postulates that the upgraded Skyline has twice the range of its predecessor, long enough to reach Moscow. The shape of both the Topaz and Skyline suggests that these drones have additional stealth qualities. These include the chine lines around the fuselage and the recessed intake at the top. In addition to the new drones, the Ukrainians have displayed a penchant for finding new purposes in old Cold War equipment. At the beginning of the war, Soviet anti-tank grenades were used with small drones. Early in 2024, Soviet-era S-200 air defense systems were used in offensive roles to shoot down Russian aircraft, including valuable AWACS planes. Well, who would have guessed that Ukraine could make use of Soviet UAVs too? The Tu-141 drone was introduced in the 1970s as a reconnaissance craft. It has a range of 620 miles. These drones are monsters weighing 7 tons, but they have jet propulsion and can reach velocities of 600 miles per hour. Ukraine began using it in 2014, but when the full-scale invasion began, the defending forces saw these behemoths as a convenient source of improvised cruise missiles, which can fly at altitudes as high as 20,000 feet or as low as the tree line. The first successful use of these drones as a cruise missile came on December 5, 2022. 2 of them struck 2 bomber bases 300 miles inside Russian territory. However, only 152 of these UAVs were made, spanning the years from 1979 to 89, so these would likely only be used against the highest priority targets that Ukrainian intelligence deems have a good chance of suffering successful hits. Ukraine has another missile drone, the Palyanitsia. The first images of this drone were released on August 25, 2024 by President Zelensky, who announced that the weapon had seen its first successful use in combat the day before. Although Zelensky said that the 24th was the debut date, it's possible that the drone was part of the arsenal that attacked the Savas-Leka air base on August 14th. The attack was 413 miles away from the Ukrainian border. The drone, named after a form of Ukrainian bread, is essentially a lightweight cruise missile. Few details are known about the drone, but it's likely a turbojet-powered projectile with a warhead of about 44 pounds and a range of between 310 and 435 miles. It combines lifting wing, electronic control, and jet technology in what appears to be a unique way, according to Alexander Dmitriev, who advises the commander of the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on UAVs and information technology. Ukraine's digital transformation minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, claims that the Palyanitsia costs less than $1 million per unit. Although this is cheaper than a typical cruise missile, it's still more expensive than other drones, which means Ukraine will probably be selective in how to employ this munition. So aside from the Lyati, whose presence was confirmed, any of these drones could have taken part in the recent attack on Moscow simultaneously. That Ukraine has so many available is a good indicator of its drone industry's health. The attack of November 10th was likely not a coincidence. On the previous evening, Russia and North Korea signed the new Mutual Defense Pact and Comprehensive Strategic Partnership that they agreed in June, amid American intelligence reports of 3,000 North Korean troops deployed to Russia. The North Koreans are training at various facilities there, with Washington warning that they would be fair game if they came to Ukraine. Russia wasn't silent about the Ukrainian drone raid. It launched 145 drones at Ukraine on the same night. Ukraine said it shot 62 of them down. Targets of the Russian attack included the important city of Odessa. Russia has been forced to recognize the growing threat of Ukrainian drones after completely ignoring the problem before the war. The police in St. Petersburg have since created an anti-drone team, and the municipal authorities in Moscow banned civilian drone flights in May 2023 to ensure they could keep track of what was going on in the skies. Russia claims that it's developing laser and microwave weapons to add to its air defense network, but these are unlikely to be introduced in the near future. Reliable data in an authoritarian country like Russia is hard to come by, but the Levada Center, which monitors public opinion there, recently found that 54% of those surveyed favored immediate peace negotiations, with 38% opposed. There has also been wide opposition to additional waves of mobilization, which has forced Putin to increasingly turn to foreign mercenaries to make up for the shortfall the elevated casualties in Ukraine are creating. The Putin regime has felt the need to increasingly crack down on dissenting voices too, to make sure everything continues going smoothly. However, only 20% of respondents in the Levada poll said that Russia should make concessions to Ukraine in a bid to end the war. This data point indicates that even though an increasing number of Russians want to see the war come to an end, they do not want to give up the territory that the special military operation has acquired. Putin cannot easily give this territory up either, because doing so will be tantamount to a confession that his people have suffered for nothing. It would end any claim to legitimacy that he has among his people, who have implicitly agreed to permit his authoritarian rule in exchange for protection and tangible gains. This is why the drone attacks on Moscow are so critical for the Ukrainian cause. The best way to tip public support against Putin and the war is to repeatedly attack Russia's largest and most influential population centers, and to prove to their people that he cannot protect them. Vladimir Putin has ruled Russia for longer than any autocrat since Joseph Stalin. Stalin supposedly said that one death was a tragedy, while 1 million deaths was a statistic. There is in fact little evidence that this phrase came from him, but Putin has nevertheless taken something like it to heart in this war. Russia might suffer as many as 1.5 million casualties over the next few years, according to Britain's top general, Sir Roland Walker. However, as long as those casualties are out of sight and out of mind, the residents of Moscow and St. Petersburg, the centers of power in Russia, will stay comfortable. Making them more uncomfortable is Ukraine's best way to win the war. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, their Western allies have proven less than cooperative in making this happen, to Kyiv's understandable frustration. But Ukraine has increasingly demonstrated its inventiveness in finding ways out of its operational straitjacket. From the beginning, Ukraine has used drones to do damage that only much more expensive weapon systems had inflicted before. It's devastated Russia's once-feared tank fleet with much cheaper weapons than other tanks or advanced anti-tank missiles like the Javelin. It's decimated the Russian Black Sea fleet, not with other ships, submarines or anti-ship missiles, but primarily with drones in the seas and skies. Ukraine's FPV drone pilots have gotten so good that they can specifically target high-level officers in the Russian army for a much cheaper price than a precision rocket or even an artillery shell. So it shouldn't surprise you that Ukraine has been increasingly able to substitute drones for cruise missiles. When 2024 began, President Zelensky made the production of 1 million FPV drones a top priority for his country's defense industry. By February, Ukraine was already set to surpass that goal. In 2025, Ukraine's drone industry might well have an even more ambitious objective: produce enough drones to pose a constant threat to Moscow and St. Petersburg, in the same way that Russia's Shahed drones have threatened Ukrainian cities, with a mind to finally end the war on terms far more favorable than it can accept now. What do you think is coming next in Ukraine's drone war? What does it take to fight off a superpower? When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, many observers and analysts assumed the war would be over quickly. As Russian troops massed on the border, stormed into the country and laid siege to Kyiv, it seemed like only a matter of time until Vladimir Putin was in control of his smaller neighbor. But against the odds, Ukraine's armed forces defended their territory and began to win victory after victory. How did they do it? All year, social media has been filled with home videos of the many ways that soldiers and civilians alike have countered the bigger, better-equipped Russian military. One of these has been repurposing salvaged equipment from defeated Russian forces, old Soviet leftovers, and even abandoned civilian homes. This has long been a tactic of underdogs in war, but here's how Ukrainians have taken the practice to a whole new level. Since the beginning of the conflict, large amounts of machinery have been left behind, captured, or shipped into the country. Now, in scenes resembling the weaponized steampunk vehicles from the movie Mad Max, Ukrainian soldiers have turned a range of civilian cars, trucks, tractors, and dune buggies into fearsome tools of combat. Armed to the teeth, these quickly constructed weapons have been inflicting some serious damage on Russian troops all year long. Valuable against both tanks and aircraft, they can function in nearly any condition, firing and racing away before they can be targeted. Civilian vehicles mounted with firepower are nothing new. In fact, they've been around almost as long as cars themselves. but the modern variety, known as technicals, were pioneered in places like Afghanistan, Libya, and Somalia during the 1990s. Originally a tool of armed groups without access to proper military hardware, they became a tool of governments during the early days of the US-led War on Terror. US and British special forces began using technicals extensively to counter the Taliban in Afghanistan, as they could navigate places with little to no infrastructure. Gradually, the technical became a key part of special operations, while also retaining its value to less equipped forces. But with sufficient military hardware at their disposal, why are Ukrainian forces utilizing technicals? While most lack the armor of a tank, technicals are fast and cheap. This makes them perfect for waging asymmetric warfare against a stronger enemy. They also do well in hard-to-reach areas, since technicals are much easier to find parts for and repair than traditional military hardware like tanks or Humvees. The war has left Ukraine filled with vehicles, many perfect for conversion into these deadly machines. And while they've recently stepped up their efforts, the story of Ukraine's creative technicals goes all the way back to 2014. After Russia annexed Crimea that year, Ukraine's volunteer battalions began to assemble a fleet of homemade war vehicles. These were often put together in abandoned industrial warehouses. Using scrap metal and old Soviet parts, the battalions began to retrofit everything they could get their hands on in preparation for more Russian aggression. Many of their early models resembled reinforced tanks, focusing on extremely heavy armor over mobility to try and hold a precarious front line. But as the prospect of a full-scale invasion loomed, Ukraine's production of light technicals greatly increased. When full-scale war finally arrived, millions fled their homes, fearing for their lives. The exodus left a huge collection of cars, trucks, tractors, and other automotives abandoned across the country. Many more modern vehicles were also donated from abroad, including armor-plated pickup trucks and SUVs. In the weeks after the invasion, dozens more small, crowd-funded factories were established inside and outside Ukraine's borders. There, volunteers attach weapons and armor plating to technicals and send them to the front line. While it can slow the cars down, the extra layer of armor on a technical is crucial, as it can save those inside from shrapnel or other deadly hazards. Among the most successful of these retrofitting operations is Cars for Ukraine, run by Ivan Oleski, a 25-year-old esports analyst originally from Kherson. Started in March, his venture has created dozens of technicals from cars around Europe. They can purchase each truck for under $6,000 and quickly transform them into fearsome weapons of war. Each is also a statement of patriotic intent, painted with a Ukrainian flag and a now popular slogan from early in the war, Russian warships, "Go f*** yourselves." But this is just one among dozens of operations, many of which are using extremely innovative designs for their technicals. While almost anything with wheels can be made into a technical, they have traditionally been constructed from light flatbeds and pickup trucks. Mitsubishi L200s are reportedly among the most desirable cars for technicals in the Ukraine, along with the Ford Ranger and Toyota Hilux models. All of these are known for their durability and easy handling. This is crucial for quickly escaping enemy fire and navigating areas with unpredictable terrain and weather conditions. Ukrainian technicals have also been seen sporting a massive range of weaponry, including machine guns, drones, and multi-rocket launch systems. Many of these were taken from defeated Russian forces. This has led to some eye-catching results all across the internet. A recent taunting video from Ukraine's defense ministry shows a Russian helicopter rocket launcher attached to the back of one such Mitsubishi truck. In another instance, a dilapidated Soviet-era Volga sedan was mounted with a remote-controlled 14.5mm heavy machine gun. While both the car and machine gun are dated, they have been integrated with the modern remote control system. Clever designs like this have helped Ukraine reduce its battlefield casualties, while inflicting substantial damage on the often unprepared Russian military. Another group of soldiers were filmed using an automatic Soviet 2B9 Vasilek 82mm mortar from the back of a farm truck. The Vasilek is usually based on a small, wheeled carriage and can rapidly fire armor-piercing shells with 75-gram warheads capable of penetrating 100mm of plating. While Soviet weapons like these are decades old, they can still dish out punishing firepower. This is especially true when mounted on a technical, giving the mortar far more versatility than the standard ground-based model. Others are more flashy, like this BMW technical, complete with a Ukrainian-themed paint job and truck-mounted machine gun. And it's not just domestic and Soviet-made weapons either. Western military support has also given Ukraine hundreds of powerful modern weapon systems like Stingers, howitzers, and Javelin anti-tank missiles. Ukrainian soldiers have been making the most of this new equipment. One unit has been using a flatbed technical to transport mobile anti-aircraft teams armed with Stingers. After spotting a target, the soldiers can be seen quickly dismounting, firing, and returning to the vehicle to make their getaway. Another creative unit applied the tactic to the ground, making their Peugeot truck into a mobile hunter-killer anti-tank platform using javelins. The key feature of all of these models is their ability to quickly escape, before Russian artillery can target them with retaliatory strikes. But it doesn't end there. Recently, it seems that Ukrainian technicals have also moved beyond regular civilian vehicles. Pictures and videos have emerged of soldiers using heavily armored dune buggies, painted in dark green camo and studded with weapons. Several of these vehicles were recently seen near the strategic city of Izium, complete with Stugna P anti-tank guided missiles attached to the roof. The Ukrainian-designed Stugna system has a range of over 3 miles, and its missiles can be remotely guided by console or laser-targeted manually. They can also carry many different types of warheads, including tandem-style rounds designed to break tank armor, high-explosive fragmentation, and even thermobaric payloads. The Stugna is usually fired from a tripod on the ground, requiring 2 to 4 soldiers to reload and move the unit, but mounting the anti-tank weapons on a technical gives them far more flexibility, allowing them to be used for hit-and-run missions. But Ukraine's ingenuity doesn't end there. A similar domestically produced missile system, the RK-3 Corsair, was seen on a buggy in another part of the country earlier this summer. Usually ground-based like the Stugna, Corsair systems have a range of 1.5 miles and can also use a range of different shells. Even lighter than pickup trucks, these deadly dune buggies have become invaluable to Ukrainian troops as the war has moved into the eastern part of the country. Many other rocket launchers have also been spotted on Ukraine's buggies, including dated Soviet weaponry. For instance, one video shows a buggy covered in camouflage netting firing a 9M111 Faget wire-guided missile system. These buggies themselves are pretty badass too. They appear to be from a range of models. Some are likely modified versions of the Ranger or MRZR models produced by US defense contractor Polaris. In their off-the-shelf form, these vehicles are intended for reconnaissance and logistics missions rather than open combat. Depending on the model, the Polaris dune buggies have over 100 to 200 horsepower and over a 2,000-pound payload capacity. Despite being very light and maneuverable, they also have an extremely durable chassis and strong suspension, making them ideal for navigating difficult areas. But Ukrainians also appear to have reinforced theirs with body armor and camouflage for extra protection against Russian fire. Other Ukrainian buggies have been far more homemade. One, captured in a photograph by the Associated Press, was constructed from a Peugeot 307 coupe convertible and with the doors and windows removed. While not a tactical vehicle like the Polaris buggies, the Peugeot 307 is still fast, able to go from 0 to 60 in 8 to 10 seconds. Speed is crucial for Ukraine's technicals, especially for the country's rapid counteroffensives in recent months. The buggy hosting the Corsair missile system is yet another model. This variety of buggy also seems to have been domestically manufactured. It has 2 seats in front and a cargo platform at the rear of the vehicle, fitted with a tripod and optics for the Corsair missile system. On the road, 2 missiles are carried in storage boxes at the back for easy retrieval and use. But how have these strange-looking dune buggies and other technicals helped Ukraine hold its own against Russian tanks and artillery? Early in the war, they played a part in helping Ukrainians repel Russia's initial push into Kyiv. Their high maneuverability proved much better at urban combat than cumbersome tanks. And after the Russian offensive failed, the fighting moved east, shifting into a heavy artillery war in the Donbass and Luhansk regions. For a number of reasons, technicals have been even more important in this context. Despite its battlefield victories, Ukraine has been heavily outgunned by Russia all year. While this has started to change thanks to the influx of Western weaponry, Russia's enormous guns can still easily destroy slow-moving and immobile targets. But by attaching their firepower to technicals, Ukraine has made their artillery much harder to destroy. Another advantage has to do with geography. While the eastern part of Ukraine is relatively flat, it is crisscrossed with rivers and has fewer major roads than the west. This means that much of the fighting is taking place in the countryside, where technicals have a substantial mobility advantage over tanks. Russian tank losses have been enormous, and by mid-October they had lost nearly 1,400 tanks, averaging nearly 10 a day. Ukraine's inventive use of technicals has contributed to these startling numbers. Whatever course the war may take this winter, it seems likely that technicals will remain a key part of Ukrainian operations due to their speed, flexibility, and low cost. While they certainly look like something out of a dystopian universe, these vehicles have proven themselves to be extremely effective in real-life combat. And just as they have gotten more inventive since the beginning of the war, Ukraine's technicals will probably keep evolving as they receive new and more lethal weapons from the West. But what do you think? How valuable have the technicals been to Ukraine? And will they keep being used and upgraded?